Apologies for absence. We have Neil Darvel as an apology, and Dave Hale is here deputising for Neil.
Thank you.
I believe Steve Hams is expected.
Yeah, he's stuck on the M4, I think. Have we any declarations of interest? Any new declarations of interest? No.
Oh.
Hi.
I stopped working for NHS Lanarkshire and I now work for Public Health Scotland.
Okay, we'll update that. Thank you.
We'll amend that. Thank you very much. Okay, the minutes of the previous meeting, normal routine page turn, page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, and page 9. Are we happy to sign those as a true record of our previous meeting? Thank you, everyone. The action chart, Xavier.
So I don't think there's anything on the action chart that needs a further update today. The first two actions are for future meetings. The action number 68, the Guardian of Safe Junior Doctor Working Report. The other two actions have been closed, subject to any questions that anybody might have.
Okay, are there any questions on action? Okay, thank you. Are there any matters arising from the previous meeting? Morning, Steve.
Sorry,
So Steve Hams has just joined us just for the recording. Are there any matters arising from the previous meeting? No. I've got no chair's business. So straight on to the chief exec's report.
Okay. I will take the paper as read. It's been previously circulated, just to draw out some changes that we're making in our ED flow, and this was in reaction to the extraordinary circumstances around the heat wave initially, where our dynamic risk assessment made it very clear that the risks of people waiting in ambulances and SWAT limited availability as a consequence outweighed some of the internal protocols that we have been working to. So we are testing this. There are a number of improvement cycles going on around this at the moment, and wanted to thank the team, and particularly Steve Hams, for their leadership. This is a quality initiative, very much about patient safety. And Steve also supporting, and we hope, early signs have been very positive, but it's obviously keeping our nerve to some extent, and making sure we are supporting staff. Clearly, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, the problem remains with our backdoor and our high percentage of no criteria to reside patients. We continue to talk to local partners. Clearly, it's a system issue, and we are looking to find remedies, but as yet they are not showing it in our figures. Talking of our system, the Integrated Care Board became an entity on the 1st of July, so we're 4 weeks in now. It's still appointing to the senior team, so we wait to see that the structure has been published. There are meetings in the diary, and the ICS has started something called the Big Conversation, as it reaches out to staff in the NHS and partner organisations and stakeholders to talk about its development strategy, and we will play a part in that. As you remember, we are part of both the partnership board and the exec board as well. Great to have Dave here today. Would like to thank him. The rollout of our electronic patient record, I have to say, obviously these things always have some teething problems, compared with other huge rollouts that many of us will have been involved in. This was an exemplary exercise in how it's been managed, risks mitigated, downtime and outage absolutely minimised, and we carried on operating throughout. So we'll say a little bit more about that, but I would like to publicly report thanks to Neil, Dave, the team, because it has been a huge piece of work, and this has been, done whilst they do all their day-to-day business. We didn't put that to one side. They had to carry on doing this in addition. So very grateful. And I think early signs, it had a lot of clinical involvement in the testing phase. So we are really in a good place with that. And as you'll recall, it now puts us able to have the same system as across the city.
How many people, probably an answer, David could answer, how many people have we got on the system now?
So we migrated 52 million records with 99.99% load success, which was exceptional. The 5.2K dropout, the critical activity for weeks 1 and 2 was remediated during the downtime period. And obviously the focus then moves on a time and risk-based rekeying and refactoring of appointments in clinics. We've had, I think it's circa 5,000 unique user interactions with the new system. But obviously the focus is on floor walking support and making sure that the system is brought into full operation actively. And we're working with our suppliers to maintain stability of the system to enable that to happen.
Fantastic. Thank you.
And then just lastly, as a preemptive move, we have written out to local stakeholders, including councillors and MPs, about a prospective or the potential for an elective care centre at Southmead. This would be a system facility. As we know, there are a number of approval stages to go through, and there are some detailed discussions to be had. So this is very much preemptive and conditional on agreements being made to go on to the next stage. But in order to secure planning permission for the timeframes we've committed to, we did have to go out now and give some preemptive warning, and I have to say that all the responses we received have been incredibly supportive of extra capacity on behalf of the system to try to get the elective backlog that everyone is well aware of. I think everything else has probably been covered or will be picked up later in the meeting.
Any questions from Maria? And just worth flagging that on the elective care centre, the private board which follows this will be looking at the business case for that in more detail. So that will follow. Any questions? Yes.
Just a comment, if I may, just to add to Maria's point around the emergency department ambulance offloads. I think it's just to extend that thanks to both the ED but the wider team for what has been a very difficult time, but they have really pulled together in an incredible way, which has been truly impressive. As Maria has said, I think
it's worth acknowledging, isn't it, that actually the real benefit of the rest of the hospital helping to own the problem, if you see what I mean, has been really dynamic. And, we can't underestimate how much energy and effort that's taken across the hospital.
Huge tribute to all the staff who
absolutely
wanted to help and support.
Okay, thank you. Right, let's move on to the staff and patient story.
Gifty is
Outside.
on her way.
Oh, she's on her way. Okay, well, let's just. So we're just waiting for Gifty, Gifty Markey, the head of patient experience, to join us. But we're going to have a closer look at Cosham. I don't know how many people, I know Richard and I were at Cosham recently, and Richard went into the dialysis renal unit. I've been there a number of times. I don't know how many other people in the room are familiar with the renal unit at Cosham. So amazing service, really good modern facilities. But we're going to look specifically, I think, aren't we, Steve, at how it was for them during COVID?
Yeah, so Cosham was quite unique in that it became our COVID dialysis service for the whole of us. So they had some unique challenges which they'll talk through. And they've done the presentation, which I think colleagues have sent Piers Gifty as we speak. I think they were expecting to come in at 10:30, which when the item was.
Gifty, come and join us. So do we have some of the team with us?
Yeah, we do. But I think we can be 10:30 chat.
Got Alice. Alice is logged in.
Alice is here on Teams.
Okay.
Good morning, Alice. Ah, who have you got with you? Have you got Lisa with you?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Lisa. Good morning, both of you.
Good morning.
Good to see you. So, yes, keep going.
So morning team. I hope you're okay. It's Steve here. I think you've got a little bit of a presentation. Xavier, have you got it?
I have got it and I will pop it up on the screen now.
So as Michelle outlined, the Caution dialysis unit, I think most of us have been there. I went there a couple of weeks ago, which was great to have the visit. Had a particularly unique part to play during the pandemic. And what this short story in essence tells us a bit about is both the experience of our colleagues, but also importantly our patients. Gifty, over to you. We're going to go straight to Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you. Lisa, are you going to start? So this is a story that is in line with our trust, vision and values, providing exceptional care in difficult circumstances. And obviously, as a renal unit, they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice to put people on waiting list. They had to treat people. So it's talking about the risk assessment, how we managed staff and supported staff to be able to deliver care in a very vulnerable group of people. So Lisa, I'll hand over to you and Alice, and I'll chip in as and when, if that's okay.
Okay. Thank you, Gifty. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Thank you.
Hi, so just there, obviously, that this is our NBT's visions and values, which obviously we share. And during COVID, Caution became quite pivotal in how we manage our dialysis patients. Unlike other services, we were unable to stop our service or reduce our service. So our area, or our only area that we could cohort our COVID patients was Caution, which all the staff have still continued to do so. So, you know, we're 18, 19 months on and we're still kind of treating most of our patients here. Our patients come from Frome, Yeovil, Bath, Weston, South Bristol, Southmead, renal dialysis unit, 8B, ADT, and anywhere else. So obviously we get a lot of holiday patients as well. So if they are COVID positive, they were coming to Caution. Do you want to do the next slide, Gifty? Thank you. So the background is we were a 24-bedded unit, central place for treating our pandemic. The risks regarding our patients, because they're immunosuppressed, they're really high-risk patients, and they tended to be treated or had COVID positive for 90 days, and it proved difficult to de-escalate them, to get them back into their own kind of dialysis unit. So that was a really difficult task, managing that. And I think, you know, Caution kind of outshine on that one. So we found that really difficult in how we could reduce it, because we had to stick within the renal dialysis, but also the North Bristol trusts. And it was kind of merging those processes together. Obviously, the stories from the patients are quite pivotal and they mean so much to us, because it's difficult to measure, because you're moving patients to areas that they don't know the staff, and potentially some of these patients have been going for many years to the same area. So to move them away from that when they were COVID positive, some, you know, may have felt it was more of a punishment because they were moved out of that area because of their understanding of the COVID and the pandemic. Do you want to do the next slide, and then I'll let Alice speak?
So this is what one of my patients wrote. My experience during COVID in renal unit was worrying in the beginning, but as the time progressed and with a better understanding of COVID, I was more settled. The staff were very helpful and understanding as to my worries of catching COVID. The staff were very good at keeping patients at a safe distance from each other. Their level of cleaning was impeccable at all times. My only concern was other people's cleanliness. A small amount of not washing hands or sanitizing. Also, some not wearing masks properly in the waiting room and not keeping a proper distance. It was also nice that COVID injections were done while I was on dialysis, which cut down a lot of stress and anxiety. As time has gone on, it has become easier as we have all got into a routine. This is Janet Nord. The next slide, please. As a dialysis patient at Horsham, my experience on treatment and care during the pandemic was safe and controlled as could possibly be. I have no concerns going for treatment 3 mornings each week, as we were checked and given clean masks every visit. We have no choice as we have dialysis to keep us alive. So from a personal point of view, I accepted the situation and got on with it. The staff were extremely careful and did everything possible to keep us safe and are still doing so. This is Stella Milsom. Thank you. This is some of our staff.
I don't think we're going to play it.
Not clean. We've got time to play it if you'd like to.
Sorry.
I
Okay.
don't think we've got time to play. I think, is that correct, Gifty? I think we want to go on to the next slide.
We've got time to play it.
Oh, okay.
If you're able to.
If you're happy to, yeah, that's great, thanks.
Attempt to. Bear with. I'm afraid the link you've given me is a video unavailable, so shall we circulate it with the public papers and a corrected link?
Okay, I sent one last night.
Yes. So we will circulate it because I really encourage everybody to look at it because it's a very personal narrative from the staff about not just there they were, you know, dealing with people who were really concerned about their own security, but just the pressure that put on the staff who were also quite rightly concerned about their own vulnerabilities. So I think there's a member of staff, I think, talks about living on her own, not being able to see her family, having to be very isolated. And actually what a relief it was to come into the unit to actually be with colleagues, but equally knowing just how difficult that all was. So, you know, very personal insight into what it was like for the team there. So I really would encourage you all to have a look at it.
The diligent version.
The diligent
Yeah.
version works.
Yeah.
Okay, so it does because I looked at it. Yeah. Okay.
Slides left.
So
Do you want to finish off the slides?
Yes, of course. So what next for the team? The team will continue to work with the patient experience team to set up their local surveys and friends and family tests for improvement in the work, triangulate complaint data and work on improvement projects and continue to seek patient feedback for improvement. But yeah, Horsham done an amazing job and are still doing an amazing job for when we have our issues in our dialysis units that are that don't have the side rooms or the side areas to care for those patients at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
thank you. So questions? Steve, go on then.
Yeah, thank you. Team, I was just wondering when you were talking to patients during that time, what was the most frightening thing that patients were worried about?
You know, they will have the COVID and whether they could survive during this, you know, by catching COVID. And they also heard, you know, about some other patient who became really, really unwell and they were hospitalized. So that was the main worry for them.
And it was also for them because COVID stayed within their system for a much longer period than it would for you and I. It became fighting for them, for their own families as well. So I think that they were very, they needed lots of reassurance and support, but you could really understand how scared they were to come to dialysis in the first place, because they didn't know, you know, if the patient next to them, because they were, or they retained the COVID, and tested positive for such a long period. So we're talking 90 days, which is a really long time, much longer than anyone else. That was our main hurdle, or their main hurdle, sorry.
Thank you.
Jackie.
Thank you very, very much for sharing the story. We love that. And actually the video for me, it's like a microcosm of 12,000 staff. And the thing that comes out to me is about your work family, you know, and that's an invisible thing, but that sense of looking after each other and team has been so vital. And it's not only what we do for our patients, it's what our colleagues do for each other, which has come across really powerfully in this story. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, I agree. Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm one of the meds, and thank you for sharing this very powerful, the patient stories, and I look forward to seeing the video. So I was wondering how many patients you looked after over that period of time, and what sort of change you saw once vaccination came in. Were the patients with you less time once they've been vaccinated? What was the sort of pattern?
The vaccination, what we did is, otherwise, these patients, they come 3 times to hospital, and then arranging another appointment to GP was really difficult for them. So the nurses who were vaccinating came to our unit to give vaccine whilst they were dialyzing. So this is what we have done. So yeah, it became really easy for them.
And that's fantastic. But did you find that once patients were able to have their vaccinations, that they were not as unwell if they caught COVID later on?
Not necessarily. I think it was all according which stage they were in their renal disease, and obviously what we do is we're maintaining their life. So, you know, if they were COVID positive, sometimes we might have to have reduced that dialysis session, or increase that dialysis session to try and maintain that. And the COVID vaccine didn't come on its own. Some patients became unwell with the COVID vaccination. People were more reassured once they had the vaccination, but it didn't really change. They're quite a unique group of patients, the dialysis patients, and they're very resilient, but they're also very scared. And I think that came across throughout the pandemic. So there was lots of challenges, but I think there was lots of, now they seem to have got over that kind of blip. They feel more free. Now the masks are coming off and people are going out and about, because they weren't able to do that during that time because they were coming to dialysis. So having that outside contact was quite vital, really.
Thank you. Any other questions? Lisa and Alice, so am I right in thinking that you became the focal for this? So you took patients from our other dialysis units?
Yes.
COVID patients, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So they came from, so although we do not, so some of the private, so Bath and Frome, our patients, or North Bristol Trust patients, go to those areas. So if they became positive, they had to then come back over to North Bristol Trust, which was obviously caution. So this is why we identified that one unit. It was quite a task trying to fit slots and people and moving them, because you have to close off a slot for that patient for 14 days, and they're not willing to exchange it because they're not, it was very complex. We do need to look at that and see if we can do something much simpler, because it came very, very complicated at one stage where we were just like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And it was just finding those extra slots because they're so precious.
And arranging transport for them to go to another place to dialyze.
So aside from the actual medical intervention quite a logistical challenge.
Yes, very much so, very much so.
Do you know rough number of patients you saw through that period?
Well, at a time we had 10 patients. That was the maximum, but I don't have the numbers.
Yeah,
So
so
many
so that's
yeah.
probably 10 patients per
Yeah.
per day
Per
or
day,
per
yeah.
slot, if that makes sense. So that's a lot of patients per week. So we're talking about 80 patients sometimes. But every week, you know, majority of the time when there was COVID outbreaks, that's what we had to do. We had to close off slots and then put those patients in. So it was like a game of chess, I believe.
We opened
Yeah.
10 slot.
Huge undertaking, huge undertaking. Well, Tim.
Could I ask how close to capacity you are in both during that period, but also more routinely? And the other point is that presumably, I mean, obviously this was a whole team effort from not just the medical teams, clinical teams, but also from the ancillary people to keep place clean and everything else.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And it is vital, and it was the whole team, the whole of the North Bristol Trust team, if that makes sense. So down from the porter to the domestics to the transport, all those were absolutely vital in maintaining that steady flow of patients coming in, cleaning those areas to the standard that we would expect. Yeah. So we are close to capacity. We need lots of our patients need transplants. That's what they're waiting for, is to get on the transplant list. So, you know, we are at capacity. Our numbers have increased significantly. We are doing home dialysis. We have that. I think we've got 3 patients on home dialysis, which is absolutely amazing, because patients then are in control of their own illness. So that's amazing. But we are at capacity. There's huge numbers that we're seeing.
Kelvin.
Thank you for your presentation. I just wondered, you get to know your patients really well, I guess, and their families. And I just wondered what they would say about what was best about the service at Cosham, and what would they say that they would like to improve the most?
Improve the most will be the transport, they might say. The transport service. Yeah.
Okay. And what do they like? What do they like about it the best?
During COVID, if you ask, it is the slot here. You know, we are a big unit, and the distance between 2 beds is maybe 2 meters. So that's best about this unit. And it's, you know, I should say it's a clean unit.
Yeah. It's very new compared to our other units. Our other units are much older areas, so they've been buildings prior to and then been made into a dialysis unit. So whether that's a social club or a room that's been used for computer services is then turned into a dialysis unit, whereas this was built specifically for a dialysis patient. So it is built to care for these patients. So that's why it's a kind of like our flagship dialysis unit, because it was built for purpose, if that makes sense.
I would change that, built for COVID purpose.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sandra.
Thank you, Tim. I'm Sandra. I'm one of the associate NEDs. I think you obviously should be incredibly proud of what you've done, because it's a fantastic story and telling us about the way you've adapted. What I wanted to know is, what is the key learning that you've taken from the way you've worked, and how are you going to use it taking it forward?
I think the team became more close when we had this trouble, and they helped each other. So we will be helping each other, when we go forward. So that's what, it came from them as well. The team became very close.
And do you feel you're going to be able to keep that going forward when when things have changed? Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. And even patients, they were willing to move to different place. of course, somebody had resistance, but then even if I say today, some of them will move to another unit to accommodate those patients. Yeah.
So they're a bit more you feel more flexible as well. Is that what you're saying as well? Yeah. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thanks. I'm Ike, one of the associate non-executive directors as well. And my question was following up on Kevin's and Sandra's, which is for you, what do you find most important or take most pride in working in the dialysis unit or North Bristol Trust? And what do you find most challenging?
So I think the challenging part for people working in the dialysis unit is that isolation away from the main trust, but we've been very lucky that we've had lots of visitors lately. Steve's visited, obviously Chief Exec's visited, and it's been really nice because the staff then feel valued. And when the wellbeing team have been really amazing as well by including all those dialysis units during COVID and throughout, and I think that made them feel part of North Bristol Trust as well, because being outside and being away, so if you're over in Weston, you're in Weston Hospital grounds, but you're not part of Weston. So it was really imperative that we included Weston and all the other units. So that was really nice. And I think staff were really complimentary about that they were being seen and they felt included and they felt up to date. The challenges, I think, is going over and visiting because of the COVID restrictions and reducing the risks of, staff going over, and moving staff over as well was very difficult because obviously staff were COVID positive or family or had to isolate. We had to then try and figure out how we're going to do that. So again, it was reliant on those slots. Slot coordinator was vital in that role of moving stuff around. So that was the kind of the challenges I think that we found, and the reward was that actually we are part of North Bristol Trust and we're very proud, and the staff have been absolutely amazing.
Thank you very much.
Richard.
Hi there, Richard Gaunt, I'm one of the non-execs. I was at Cosham recently and I actually went round the renal unit, so I'm aware of how really up to date it is with the isolation rooms as well for those that are particularly challenged. I was just interested in the fact that, as you were saying, we're near capacity. So I was just interested in who's actually looking at that. Is that something that you're looking at and trying to deal with as just a renal unit at Cosham, or is that something that's dealt with at NBT level, in which case who's dealing with that at executive, or is it an ICS issue across the system, in which case who's looking at it from a system perspective?
Yes, it's across the southwest and it's part of our renal regional team. We're looking at that and seeing the increases. I think the list, the transplant list, I think is the issue around about that, and there's been a delay in creating fistulas, and there's lots of other there's other issues that have been, COVID has caused because we haven't been doing the fistulas or those kind of things, and I think that has had a huge impact. So it's catching up with that. So our team at North Bristol Trust work very close with our Essex and Devon teams and everywhere else, and then our manager and obviously our execs and our nursing side of it, and we're kind of like working together. So we kind of get together probably twice a month and discuss the issues and concerns and where we're going with this. So, and I think NHS England are also part of that as well. It's not just isolated in kind of North Bristol Trust, it is the outer areas as well, where those have been huge delays and a high risk in HD patients.
Thank you, Tim.
So I always use the opportunity to remind everyone that the R in ASCR is renal medicine. So that's the division in which renal medicine sits. It's incredibly well managed. and we run obviously both our in-house dialysis service for acute patients, the dialysis service on site for chronic dialysis, and the local system services, Cosham, Western, South Bristol, etc. So that's how we manage the system, if you like. But regionally, our the clinical lead for the network, the operational delivery network, is also a consultant at Southmead Hospital. So we're very pleased and privileged to be able to access him and his information in terms of regional planning. Regional delivery of renal dialysis is a fascinating history and quite a complex history, which is both a public and private partnership. And there has been the use of private partnerships with dialysis organisations, particularly on the periphery of our system in Baines and in Bath, in Wiltshire, etc. And those relationships have matured actually over time, and there is now a pushback from the private company delivery more to an NHS-centred delivery, which we are embracing.
Glenn.
It was just a comment around some of the logistics. Tim's answered in a lot more detail, but the sort of community services out at Cosham and South Bristol are run as close to capacity as possible, so that any spare capacity is built up in the acute centre, so to handle the more complex cases as they come in. So these places like Cosham are running close to capacity all the time.
Thank you, everyone. Alice and Lisa, thank you so much. Would you, on behalf of the board, pass on our thanks to the whole team, please?
Yes, thank you.
I'd really like the team to know just how much we appreciate what they do, not just through COVID, but what they do day in and day out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If I could just add one thing, which is, I know we talked about the wonderful environment services, obviously staff at Cosham. Just to, I know it had been a concern of the board, the facilities at Knoll have been extensively refurbished in South Bristol. A slightly different position, as you will appreciate, at Western. We have a service, a merged service, but the built environment is not ours. So trying to make some change there is a little more difficult, and that's perhaps something we might as a board want to think about going forward as we look increasingly at hub and spoke type services, how we get those properly managed.
I think we need a bit of clarity, don't we, around Western? Yeah. Okay, thank you, everyone. We're a little bit ahead of time, so Tim, could I just leap down the agenda and do medical revalidation next?
Yes. Sure. So I was going to sort of just take the opportunity to look at items 9 and 10. Obviously, we have regulatory responsibilities for safe doctors in training working, as well as the medical appraisal, revalidation, and if things go wrong, investigation of qualified doctors. Just to put that into perspective, we at any one time the number varies, but it's roughly on every day employing 1,400 doctors in this organisation, which is a huge number by any standard, and we have responsibilities to each and every one of them. By doing so, we ensure very safe and efficient patient care, and that's the core of these two papers. Now, I think Lucy is on her way. I have tried to
clinic, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I've tried to contact her, and I do hope she comes, because she is independent from me. So she has a direct responsibility to the board. So her paper on the Trust Guardian for Safe Junior Doctor Working is very much her to you. And so I wouldn't want to intervene and try to paraphrase that. It's very important that she is independent of me to you. So I'll wait and hope that she does arrive, and therefore, as you suggest, Chair, I'll jump straight into medical revalidation. So I'll take this paper as read. Indeed, it is quite complex, and there are two papers, you'll notice. It's pretty much self-explanatory. This is an opportunity for you to ask me questions or to clarify things that may not come out loud and clear from the report. But very importantly, it is my recommendation that the chair and chief executive add their signature to the statement of compliance, which is a regulatory and legal requirement for us to do annually. So this report refers to 850 doctors who are employed by this trust, and for which we have a responsible officer and appraisal and revalidation responsibility. I'll just walk you through the headlines of this report, if I may, and just flag anything which I think is exceptional. What we do in this report, first of all, is explain to you the appraisal process. So appraisal process is an annual event for doctors, and it culminates on the 5th year of their appraisal cycle with a recommendation or not for revalidation to the General Medical Council. It's extremely important. Non-engagement with the process is a GMC matter, and it can affect the licence to practice. We describe the appraisal process, but what I'd like to highlight to you really in this report is that we are currently using and will continue to use the appraisal 2020 model. This was a model which was advocated by Sir Steve Powis, who's the medical director for England, as a result of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. And in a nutshell, what it means is there is less form filling, there is less documentation, but there is a greater emphasis on a face-to-face individualized conversation with the clinician and their appraiser. The idea behind that is that it allows that face-to-face consultation or interaction to tease out issues which are troubling the doctor, particularly around well-being, health, and lifestyle, and in their intentions perhaps towards the latter end of their career. What we do in NBT is we've introduced in the last 6 months a better vetting process for these discussions, such that our revalidation team, who are excellent and highly emotionally intelligent, look at every appraisal that's taken place and are able to tease out areas of concern or potential concern, which are then reviewed by my deputy, Sanjoy Shah, who has 3 options. He can work with those individuals and help them to seek guidance in the wellbeing team and services that we provide at NBT. He can refer to me if there is need for direct intervention, or most commonly, he can ensure that there's a discussion between the individual doctor and the divisional management team to help to work on particular issues. For example, it could be that the individual doctor feels that their job plan is affecting their well-being, and that can be something which can be sorted out fairly easily. We will continue to use appraisal 2020. Sometimes it's called appraisal light, but I don't like that term. It's not a light appraisal. It's just a different emphasis from pieces of paper and form ticking to actual face-to-face consultations. A typical appraisal, for example, will take between 2 to 3 hours. So it is a significant and in-depth discussion with individuals. The second heading talks about quality assurance. So we have to provide a responsible officer for these individuals, that's me. We have to also have an electronic appraisal system. We currently use a system called 14 Fish, and we're in the 4th out of 5 years of a contract with 14 Fish. It has proved a very effective appraisal tool, and it is shared with our colleagues in Bristol. We provide salaries for the support staff, and we're adequately staffed, and we provide training for appraisal for our appraisers. If anything, I would comment that we could always do with more appraisers, and perhaps an area that we can work on is to try to attract our colleagues to become appraisers in the future. We have enough, but it is we're constantly seeking more appraisers. All of our policies for our medical appraisal and revalidation have to be and approved by the Joint Stating Committee, in other words, with our consultant bodies. And we do provide evidence for audit and quality assurance. So the last formal audit from NHS England was in 2015. Our medical appraisal and revalidation process was deemed to be excellent. And I've just been informed and are planning a full audit and quality assurance by NHSE later in the year, probably towards the end of November. In 2017, we had a very short visit from NHSE who had no comments to make. And we have performed in April 22 a KPMG internal audit of our medical appraisal and revalidation system, which did find minor areas for improvement, all of which we've worked on. Part 3 of this document talks about our responsibilities to the General Medical Council. Generally, we make very positive recommendations for revalidation for doctors, but we don't always. The most common reason for not making a positive recommendation is that I find that there is inadequate evidence of a thorough discussion during the appraisal process, or there is some essential documentation missing. Often this is feedback. Particularly over COVID, it has been difficult for doctors to achieve the required number of feedback evidence from both patients and from colleagues. So that's a common reason that I may recommend a deferral, usually for 3 to 4 months, while that individual completes the paperwork or redoes an appraisal. In actual fact, non-engagement, which is where doctors have failed to provide that evidence, is extremely rare. There has been one very recently, but I'm pleased to say that individual was able to bring their portfolio up to speed. Part 4 of the document talks about the governance and details how I, as the responsible officer, am able to access any individual doctor's appraisal and revalidation portfolio. And it also outlines our approach to concerns. We have a very good functioning medical workforce group in which concerns and potential concerns are discussed, usually through the lens, I should say, of the just culture approach, which we've very much adopted in the last 12 months, but do allow us to make recommendations to you as a board when doctors have reached a significant threshold of concern requiring an MHPS investigation. Part 5 of the document talks about the employment checks that we make, and I should emphasise that part of our responsibilities, particularly around locums and short-term placements. So we are compliant in all of our employment checks, both pre-employment and post-employment. So there is a significant amount of shifting of information to doctors for doctors to their next post, for example. And part 6 is the conclusion and recommendation from me in the hope that you would agree to sign this compliance statement. Now, there is a second document there, and apologies for this, but there's a part, I think tab 10.1 is the NHSE statement of compliance. Quite simply, that's just a distillation of the previous paper in the required format to NHSE, for which we will sign. A copy goes to NHSE, the General Medical Council, and to the Medical Director of England's office. So thank you.
Thank you. Have we first of all, any questions for Tim on this? Maria?
So unlike the general line management appraisals, the appraiser doesn't necessarily know.
So we have
appraising.
That's correct. So often, and in fact, I have previously encouraged the appraiser to be not from within the department of the appraisee. I think that there's some evidence from elsewhere that there are some conflicts of interest when that occurs. Yeah. So I have encouraged them to be from a different department, specialty or division even. We do encourage short-term relationships. So the same appraiser, perhaps for 3 to a maximum of 5 years. after 5 years, and I'd prefer, to be thinking about this after 3 years, then there is the approach of a different appraiser, so that relationships don't get too comfortable, for want of a better expression.
Okay, and follow up if I may. So complaints and incidents aren't disclosed.
So they are. So we did have a.
Wrongly, then it.
So it has changed. So you'd be forgiven for believing that. So we had a process where complaints and incidents were uploaded automatically into the portfolio of the doctor, and those were available for the appraiser to see. And then on the recommendation of NHS England, we stopped doing that. We have now reintroduced it. So we are now encouraged that a conversation takes place about complaints and incidents. And I, as the responsible officer, have the responsibility of ensuring that serious complaints, particularly issues perhaps with the coroner, perhaps with issues regarding MHPS processes, and including employment and performance issues, are brought to the attention of the appraiser for specific discussion within the appraisal.
John?
Yeah, actually, I mean, I am appraised under our system. I wanted to say a couple of things. The first was to reassure the board and re-emphasise what Tim had said about this sort of discussion where people bandy around the term appraisal light. It's not. It's more straightforward for the appraisee to upload their documentation. But I don't think the nature of appraisals has changed, and the approach to issues of probity, which I guess is where you were going there, Maria, I think is of course as rigorous as it's ever been. I happen to think that the system works really well. I've obviously been appraised in the NHS in a number of different systems. My question to Tim, though, is, I think, given that we've been doing appraisals now for a period of time measurable in decades, and we all understand about revalidation, I would probably expect compliance to sit upwards of 85%. And I'm just slightly surprised, and I appreciate that it may not be to do with the system, because of course it's up to us to link up with our appraiser, prompted by the system regularly, in order to undertake them, that we've got neuro sitting below 80, well, neuro and women's and children's both sitting below 80. Now, if they were small groups of consultants and that figure was derived from 1 or 2 not completing their appraisal, I'd perhaps suggest that we were just looking at, a sort of anomaly related to the absolute numbers. But we are talking about a grand total of 32, if I've got the calculation right, of our consultants. And I just wondered whether there was something odd about neuro or women's and children's, given, the clearly sort of superb uptake and use of appraisal by everyone else in the system.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Obviously, 85% and above is where we want to be, John.
Yeah.
And therefore, we have done some deep dives into these specialties. So appraisal may not be completed for a number of reasons: long-term sick, maternity absence, for very valid reasons, doctors who've been unable to achieve their required portfolio, particularly around feedback from patients and colleagues, COVID and long COVID symptoms, for example, and significant changes or disputes about job plan. So each one of those is on our list. People who have missed or are awaiting completion of their appraisal are known to us, and each one are in communication with our revalidation team, Sanjoy, or indeed in some cases myself. So we know who they are, and we know why their appraisal was delayed or incomplete. And I believe that everyone, apart from one individual at the moment, has a plan to complete their appraisal and or revalidation. So we know who they are, John, and we are working with them.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes, my question was really along those lines, but initially I just wanted to have the statement when you said we had 1,400 doctors, but we're only appraising 800, which kind of leaves a gap of 600, so I didn't quite understand.
Doctors in training to come. So Lucy has arrived at the right time to explain what we do with the other doctors.
Right. And then second, just following up really on John's point, I see we had 158 who didn't have appraisals with 46 who had agreed exceptions. So I just kind of wondered about the other 100, which is approximately 15% of the total.
Yeah, usually deferred for some reason. So deferral for, as I said, for incomplete portfolio, incomplete feedback, medical reasons really. So we do defer a number of them. My opinion is I'd rather I accept a lower appraisal compliance rate and a higher deferral rate if that means the quality of the output is higher than speeding people through or accepting a portfolio which is less than adequate. So that's my approach to it.
Is there a sort of a final deadline, or can that?
Well,
yeah,
that's a good question. So those deadlines are not actually set by me; they're set by the GMC. So what I would do is on a monthly basis, I meet with the GMC, the liaison team for the Southwest, and we discuss every doctor who's missed an appraisal or indeed a revalidation, and we agree on the period of deferral. Now that's typically 3 to 4 months. If there is a valid excuse after that for non-completion, then it's a discussion which is very much led by the GMC. They will inspect the quality and tell me how long they are prepared to defer that doctor for. We have had people deferred for 12 months. It's exceptional to be deferred beyond 12 months. After that, it is non-engagement, and that is a GMC process.
Okay.
I think I've seen this before, and it does appear to be a very robust and thorough process. What I was trying to understand is the alignment between this and, I suppose, what might be perceived as routine or regular issues. So whether it be behaviour or culture or other issues that might be detected by colleagues within a particular team, how is that linked into some form of performance monitoring between what are equivalent consultant colleagues? And are we happy that that gets picked up by maybe clinical directors or by team leaders within a consultant group outside of this, but critically related to it?
I think my answer is we're not perfect, but we're better at it. So it's important to remember that the appraisal and revalidation system is for the benefit of the individual doctor, in the knowledge that that will improve the safety and efficiency of patient care. So it is not a performance management tool, and it is not an opportunity for us to critique or criticise or explore their behaviour. It's an opportunity very much for them to speak to us. So we do have the serious concerns, which we are able to parachute in, and they're meant to stimulate a discussion. They're not performance management. They're meant to allow reflection for the individual doctor to explain how he or she felt about that particular incident. So it's not performance management. Outside of performance management, then I think we've got much better divisional structures for picking up concerns. As you know, we monitor complaints against individuals. We monitor performance in several ways. And we particularly rely on the divisional management teams to triangulate information. And we do that, and we try to intervene very early. I acknowledge that at this board, you see quite a rarefied picture. You see this report, and then you'll see me at board bringing you our Doctors Under Investigation report, which is a very short report. What you never see is that you never see the richness beneath that, which allows us to distill into these two reports. But perhaps that's something that we can bring more formally to this board, if you'd like.
Well, I think it's quite interesting to understand. I think culture and behaviours sometimes is, and there's a lot of evidence around about how that impacts on teams. Obviously, it's stated blindingly obvious. It's how we pick up on that and how we handle that. I'm not always clear, whether there is a hierarchy, whether there is a performance management arrangement within CDs or within teams, and how we pursue those. So some degree of understanding of that would be probably quite helpful, actually.
And to come in on that very point, Tim has recently commissioned a whole piece of medical workforce transformation cultural and behavioural piece is absolutely key in that, because it's the soft stuff, if you like, that's under there. And it's from how we have those conversations. We're doing a lot more training, development, management skills, if you like, not the specialist clinical skills for specialty CDs, etc. And, you know, we're going to start rolling that down. And it's been built into things like promotions and indeed recruitment interviews, where we're not only looking at their specialist clinical skills, we're actually recruiting and we're promoting people against them living the values. So there's a huge amount of work there where we're really trying to develop those skills and making sure that that's a key part of their career pathway.
It's important to say when we sit in a consultant recruitment panel, you know, the NEDs all chair them and members of the exec team all sit there, that we aren't seduced to only explore their clinical expertise, that we are robust looking at the leadership contribution they make to the organisation and their attitudes and behaviours to that.
And I think that's absolutely vital, but it almost sometimes feels that once they it's not fair, but once they pass the test of getting into a consultant, how are they then performance managed? And I'm not personally that clear sometimes that there is a methodology around that and attitude and behaviours amongst other things. But there may be clinical issues, but those are picked up frequently in the clinical route. But it's that thing that can massively impact our performance if we're not careful.
I mean, I agree. There is no perfect solution, and it's not a unique problem question for us. I think the performance management is much better now through the job planning process. So in actual, the nuts and bolts of what an individual doctor does and delivers is much more formal through that job planning process and challenged. And we do challenge job plans annually and change job plans annually. I think the cultural piece relies on the network, and I think our just culture approach has actually been extremely helpful, Jackie, because we take calls, emails, concerns from people at a very early stage. And I think that's incredibly helpful. And it does feel tangibly different to our approach 2 to 3 years ago. So I don't have a perfect solution for you. I don't have a perfect paper to present to you. All I have is an assurance that I think it's improving.
Okay, so Mike and then Steve, and then I'm going to wrap this up.
Thank you. Just to add on that point, that 360-degree appraisal is always a part of this. And so actually, unlike many other staff groups, you do get from their peers, the subordinates, and as well as from their line managers, a view of how they are doing on some of the soft stuff. And I just wanted to say that as someone who's been appraised on different systems, that I do appreciate the approach that's taken, because it seems measured, it seems focused on support, not losing the big stick when you need it, which I think is because it often has tended to swing the other way, and minor things that with a little support could have been, put right, they get lost. So I'm sort of an endorsement of you. Thank you from my perspective.
Thank you, Mike. Steve?
Yeah, just a degree of triangulation. As Tim says, there's no foolproof here, but there are other mechanisms whereby, for example, the CDs, the divisional CDs, have an annual appraisal with me as their line manager. And that does take us through to some quite material aspects of what they do, through from culture, but also in terms of productivity, in terms of some sort of big ticket changes that we require them to lead. And on the journey from general management to clinical leadership, I think that's where the rub is in terms of these individuals. We have regular discussions about the difference between representing and leading, and taking responsibility and accountability for the delivery of services. So there is another aspect to overall governance, if you like, and development around that takes us into a more, I suppose, line management arrangement that does take us into some of those sort of more transactional questions and asks about productivity, workload, efficiency, and delivering for the agenda of the organisation.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. So is the board content for either myself or Maria to sign our compliance statement? Yep. Okay, thank you, everyone. Lucy, you're very welcome. I think Tim's going to introduce your paper. Great to see you. I know you're in clinic, so I'm sorry to distract you.
Thanks, Lucy, for coming in person as well. I know you're very busy. So Lucy Kirkham is a consultant anaesthetist and our very excellent guardian of SAFE. And this is where I trip up. Junior doctors in training, working guardian.
Yeah.
Changes all the time. And Lucy's been in post a number of years now. It's not the first time you've met her in this board, but she's here to present an item for discussion and assurance that we look after our doctors in training so that they are able to look after our patients. Over to you.
Thank you. I think I had a few slides. I don't know if I forwarded them to the secretary, which might help.
Afraid I don't have those slides, Lucy.
I've got them. Oh.
Okay. I'm afraid our shared drive has been not syncing this morning, so I can't see those slides. So the paper that you submitted has all your tables in it. You may have to refer to that, I'm afraid.
Can we not share them?
Amy can share them.
Thank you.
Great. So again, headline statement that the rotas which are put out by HR to each of the specialties are again compliant with the 2016 contract and its refreshers, which is great. As far as I'm aware, there are no reports that any of the specialties are deviating from those rota designs, and there's no reports from any of the trainees saying that they've got a rota which is different to that. So our rotas which are going out to the specialties are compliant with the 2016 contract, which is great. Next slide. Thanks. So this slide really is just to try and give you a flavour for the how many exception reports we get per month. Certainly I included the last 4 months in the report, but this shows 2022, and you can see each of those bars is a month. So through 2022, we're consistently getting around 25 to 30 exception reports, the vast majority of which are around hours, where trainees submit an exception report because they've stayed late for anything between 30 minutes to a couple of hours. Most of the exception reports on hours, you can see the grey column is general medicine, but then general medicine accounts for almost half of the postgraduate doctors at NBT, and also that they're not sort of divided down into nuances. Trainees will often put in general medicine, whilst in ASCR or NMSK, they'll pick the specifics of their specialty, so that subdivides it out. So they often look overrepresented. The table on the right is just to allow you to compare the number of exceptions we're getting per month with last year. So last year in April, May and June, we saw a surge in exception reports, which were mostly around hours, staying late. The feel on the ward was that staffing was sort of at minimum levels, and we attributed that to clinical fellows departing, and we saw this surge in exception reporting, and certainly we've not seen that so far this year in April, May and June. You could attribute that to there's less fellows, but I couldn't say that's for definite. It could be due to a number of other factors, but we're not seeing a surge in exception reporting, which is good. If we move on to the next slide. So this shows the exception reports that were submitted over the last month since last trust board that I attended. Again, bang on the money, we had 109 exception reports as we did the previous 4 months. Most of those reports, as I said, were around hours, 99 of them. There were some immediate safety concerns, 4. Those were fed back to the medical clinical leads and also discussed at the postgraduate doctors forum. They were mainly around feeling that the workload was excessive, having a complex patient where you had trouble accessing your senior support because they were dealing with another unwell patient. And we talked about having the senior reg out of hours for medicine, touching base more frequently with the juniors. And at the PDF, we talked with Tim and also with Sue Nutland about how minimum staffing levels are set for the wards and whether there's anything we could do to make that more visible when they breach minimum staffing, and whether that minimum staffing level is still correct. So we did talk about that would be quite a large piece of work to look at how each ward, each specialty is setting what is the minimum safe staffing for the wards, and if that still feels right. So that's something which we would be looking toward in the future. The educational exceptions were mostly around foundation doctors not being able to attend their mandatory F1, F2 teaching. That's been fed back to the foundation programme directors. And as I've said before, that those lectures are made available on video as well, so that they don't lose out. And it's across a variety of specialties, not sort of one individual specialty that's really struggling to let their trainees out. If we move to the next slide. So this was around gaps on rotas. So gaps on rotas, it's difficult to meaningfully plot. Obviously, it's just one snapshot in time. Gaps change all the time with appointments coming in and adverts going out. So it's hard to meaningfully report on it and infer a lot from it. Certainly, I've included in the report a preliminary gap report, which shows variance in the specialties of greater than one whole-time equivalent. It's not against establishment, and that's something which I'm hoping to work with Ben Pope about getting a report that's more fit for purpose against establishment, and sort of dividing it into the clinical fellows and the doctors in training so we can see where that movement is. So I'd hope to bring that to the next trust board that I attend. Certainly the preliminary report showed that the greatest variance between April and July was for ED trainees at -9.6. I'm told that that's mostly around resignations, which we do see at this time of year. There's been no increase in exception reporting from that area to indicate that they're struggling with this variance. And certainly the trainees that have come to the Postgraduate Doctors Forum haven't highlighted any particular concerns around that area and staffing. Looking at the other specialties, there was a variance which amounted to -14, but then there were wins in other specialties around +12. So there's some flux in other specialties, but not such big movements as there were in ED. Looking at how the trust manages gaps, we've certainly got quite an exciting piece of work around a locum app called Locum Nest, which we're hoping, I've been told that should be trialled in the emergency areas towards the end of July, everything being equal. So that will be really interesting to see if that enables those areas to recruit to sort of short-term gaps more effectively. And we should be able to see that by the sort of NBT bank locum data, which looks at number of hours requested and those that are filled. So we might see that the hours requested are more frequently filled, which would be fantastic. At the bottom, the table just looks at the data that HR have supplied me with at known gaps for August. And according to that data, we're in a good position between the divisions in terms of there's very few gaps for doctors in training and fellows, and where there are gaps for fellows, adverts are out to try and recruit to them. If we move to the next slide. So this slide looks at NBT bank locum use. I haven't included the vacancy on this slide because it's always such a nominal amount. We've spent a little bit less than the previous 4 months. But again, medicine is the biggest user, but as we've said, they do account for almost half of the postgraduate doctors at the trust. At the last trust board, it was raised as to what is the link between locum spend and gaps. I have struggled a bit to get any sort of linear link because talking to specialties, we're a bit different from nursing in that there are very strict sort of national standards about minimum levels of nursing per wards, whilst with doctors, it is more of the specialty and the acuity and the need for the doctors on the ward. And also some specialties, if a doctor is absent due to short-term circumstances, they definitely need to fill that gap because of ward cover, whilst other specialties, such as anaesthetics, the junior doctors are often supernumerary, so them being absent, you don't necessarily need to put out for a locum for that. So gaps and requests for locum spend is different between different specialties, so it's hard again to infer too much from who's requesting the most locum spend. If we move to the next slide. So this is just a little bit about what I've been doing for the last 4 months. I think at the last trust board, there was a request to try and increase engagement from the postgraduate doctors. So certainly we've added dates on the link calendar and a banner advertising the Postgraduate Doctors Forum since last board to try and raise the profile of the Postgraduate Doctors Forum. Posters are refreshed. The reps have been encouraged to bring as many doctors as possible. We've thrown some money at it and they get a £5 view voucher if they attend, and also trialled a guest speaker at the last Postgraduate Doctors Forum, and she was fantastic, talking about expedition medicine, one of our doctors in training here. So that was really interesting. And continued with all the things that we were already doing, about an email out to them to show them what we're doing, to encourage engagement. So we've certainly pushed for engagement. I think it is natural that the doctors are coming to the end of their placement, so there is a waning of interest and commitment, and I think we will see a surge again in August, certainly from the new doctors coming in. So we'll see what happens with that. In terms of benchmarking, I attended the BMA Guardian of Safe Working conference, which was very interesting to talk to some other guardians in the small groups. They have similar issues, similar grumbles around the exception reporting system, similar challenges with engagement and gaps around this time of year. So yeah, it certainly didn't feel that we were an outlier, and that our experience presented very much in other trusts. Should we have the last slide? So this is just a couple of the issues that have come up in the last 4 months that I just wanted to raise. One was just around the timeliness of the August rotas going out. So it is a contractual requirement that doctors receive their individualised rotas 6 weeks prior to the commencing duties. And it was brought to my attention by HR that a number of specialties had not got their rotas out at that 6 week deadline. They are all out obviously now, and there was a small delay in getting them out of a matter of days. There were 2 doctors who contacted me who were frustrated at not having their rotas in a timely manner. And having spoken to HR, there was no particular IT issues or staffing issues that were highlighted. So I don't really have an answer as to why they were late going out. Anecdotally, at the PDF, we discussed it, and there was a feeling in the room from some of the junior doctors that it's not uncommon, particularly in some specialties such as medicine, which is quite complex and big, that the rotas might be slightly late in coming out. So that's something which I think we need to work on. And the other just challenge, which was around planning leave for the postgraduate doctors. Obviously, everyone looks forward to their leave, and planning it and knowing when it's coming up and that it's approved can be a source of great anxiety. Rotas aren't always made available for the year, unlike some other trusts, which the doctors talked about going to somewhere like Gloucester and Cheltenham, where you might get your rota for the entire year. You know what you're doing. You can request your leave for weddings and whatever else, and so you know where you are, and this makes for a happy work-life balance. And we don't have that across specialties here. Using eRoster can make it difficult to swap shifts, and I know Sue in HR was going to look at adjusting their view on eRoster so that they can, if they're unable to get the leave, that they can make swaps more easily. So it's just these things which just make them happier, make for a better work-life balance, which certainly we're going to meet up with medicine and explore how we could move that forward. Are there any questions?
Sure there are. Just before we do that, can I just ask you to flesh out slightly for us this business about the appointment of PAs to previously held clinical fellow posts?
So this was a business case which Sue and Phil Broad have written. They were going to take it to OMB, but Sue has told me that that's pushed back, and that there's a further piece of work that needs to look at their utilisation in the broader NBT system. So that's not moving forward currently. I know we train the physicians associates here, so we've got a pool of them potentially, which I'm sure would be keen to get permanent appointments here. I know in terms of their usefulness, in terms of prescribing and requesting x-rays, that's something which still the GMC has delayed. So potentially, I think it's 2023 now that they've pushed it back to where and that would obviously for the OMB report be a clear winner when they've got that additional utilisation, that then they would be almost like for like for some fellows and maybe a more consistent member of the workforce team. So I don't think that's something that's going to move forward in terms of a lot of fellow positions converting to PAs in the immediate future, but it's something to keep an eye on. And certainly when the GMC sort of bring them under their wings for the prescribing and X-ray requesting, that in the future in 2023 we might see more of.
Yeah, great, thank you. Tim.
Yeah, it's been encouraging progress on e-rostering, which we've been pushing for a long time.
Right.
So it's quite interesting then to find that actually it now appears to be a constraint rather than an advantage to a degree. To actually, the whole purpose was hopefully to make it easier for people to be able to move things around rather than having to do everything by just mutual agreement. And so I hope that we can change that. But I just wondered whether e-rostering more generally is helpful in terms of giving a better picture and understanding of what the situation is.
It's quite difficult to answer. I think probably Sue Nutland HR might have a better feel for that. I think from the trainees' point of view, sometimes certainly the trainees who are moving to Cheltenham and Gloucester said, from their point of view, almost having an old-fashioned Excel spreadsheet showing you who you're going to be on the rota with, and across the board, so you know who you can contact to do swaps with, can be quite easy. Whilst my impression with e-rostering is it is a little laborious scrolling through week by week by week to find the week that you want off, to find out who you're working with, to then make the swap. I think that the phrase was you've got to really want to swap to be able to go through it.
Method in our madness.
Yeah, but I think we were looking at that there's a planner view which might make that easier for them, and whether or not if some of the rota writers, if they are still using a degree of sort of Excel alongside the e-rostering, whether it's just a matter of listing the names so people know who they're on the rota with, they can swap with. Yes, mixed feelings I think from the trainees about it. Yeah.
Maria. Just a couple of points. First of all, so doctor resignations, what is the sort of equivalent exit interview following up on why that might have happened process?
I don't know the answer to that. So I'm not really involved in resignations and how we determine why they've left, but it would be very interesting, wouldn't it?
It's duties, isn't it? Yes, and the people team pick up and will do exit interviews when they know the resignation. So.
With junior doctors?
Yes, with anyone who would say it, yeah, absolutely.
Do we know why?
No, I don't know. No. Nor would I, because it's quite small.
So I'm happy to bring that information forward if I know who to contact to get it. So when there are resignations, because my assumption is at this time of year that resignations are about, I'm about to take up a number training post, I would like to go travelling for a month, yeah.
And we do know that's the evidence on some of them, and to come on that, and it's linked with the locum spend is in terms of our workforce planning for clinical fellows. Everybody wants to leave in the summer and go and take an extended holiday, and we absolutely need to flatten that out, because we can see when we get to our operational figures, this is a really busy time for us, and so an annual sort of peak of this happening. So one of the things about using e-rostering is how do we sort of flatten that out, and actually having a more composite workforce. And you talked about physicians associates and looking at different roles as well in there is a great piece of the medical transformation work that Sanjoy and Tim are doing. And on e-rostering, we absolutely are not going to have spreadsheets and things because there's duplication. And I agree, there's teething problems and it isn't as user friendly. It's always the same, isn't it, when you go on to new systems? But we are doing work on extending that view, make that, yeah, absolutely easy to do.
You and I talked a long time ago about poor junior doctor who didn't know if he could attend his own wedding because he wasn't able to have his leg. And I think we have to be able to make that commitment to staff well in advance. So please, we will work that through. And then just lastly, and I'm prepared to be run out of town for this, and perhaps it's more a question for you, but in our dynamic risk assessment ongoing, in a position where we have significant gaps, how viable is it to say to other doctors who may have PAs for research or quality improvement, would like you temporarily to convert back into patient-facing work?
So I think we do. I mean, we did that extensively, as you know, during the COVID, and people pivoted all of those activities back to clinical work. I think perhaps a little bit of the hangover from COVID is that people will increasingly tell us that they've done that and their research or their other activities or their other interests suffered, and they're more keen to keep those activities. We cannot contractually enforce people to do that. It is on goodwill, according to the job planning and the HR rules that surround them. So it's not an enforceable thing, I'm afraid. It is but we do, and the reason we don't have so many agency calls and locum calls is that doctors will generally step in and help.
Okay, great. Sarah.
Thank you, Lucy. So two quick questions for me. One is what's happening with sickness rates, just from a sense from what you see, whether junior doctors in training sickness rates are going up. And the second thing is around part-time and flexible working and what we've got in place on that.
So as part of my role, I'm not sure, that's not something which I routinely gather about sickness rates. Certainly I can see in the locum figures where it's broken down as to whether it's vacancy or winter pressures. I don't get told I don't receive any information that's not part of my role to gather information on sickness. So I'm sorry about that. In terms of the flexible working, sorry, what was your question?
Are we able to put that in place for junior doctors so that they...
Are they treated equally?
Sorry?
Are they treated equally? Or
are they treated equally?
Well, I know, as we've said, in terms of the postgraduate doctors, about 170 out of the 570 or so are fellow positions. A lot of the fellow positions are appointed to 80% clinical, so they have a research facility. And I know there are a number of research jobs which are appointed to with greater research time. Flexible working, again, that's not something which I receive a report on, or that's something of part of the Guardian of Safe Working role, I'm afraid. So it's not something I looked at. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And maybe that's something we could.
Yeah, we do have, the people team do have that data, and we can break it down by that.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is that there is increased flexibility and an increased requirement for either doing sabbaticals, doing studying, etc. So yes.
Just thinking about retaining. Thank you.
Steve, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
It was just, I think I'd probably say this most times and then kick myself for not doing what I'm about to say that I'm going to do. But the work you do around doctors would also be very good if we did it around other professional groups. And I wonder if we ever really spend the time on other professional groups the way that we do with our doctors, which is quite right to do. But we have some interesting challenges around nursing, midwifery, AHPs, clinical scientists, which probably also be helpful to think about how we ensure their safety as well as our doctors.
So I agree, Steve. we do. I mean, this is a very formalised process, isn't it? And it comes from a legacy of some very challenging times that junior doctors were enduring, particularly with working hours. But I'm pleased to say we 2 weeks ago appointed a lead medical healthcare scientist who is very keen to ensure that all of her medical scientists, healthcare scientists are quality appraised. And part of that quality appraisal is something not too dissimilar to monitoring their workload in this fashion. So at least the healthcare scientists, we're making some progress.
Are you volunteering?
Well, I need to volunteer because they're my professional group. So I
think you do, really.
It's for me.
You can't raise it and then not volunteer.
But it always reminds me the great work that's done around doctors and Guardian of Safe Working Practice, that we should really do it for other professional groups, even though we're not required.
Yeah.
Something we should.
Well, do let us know when you'd like to bring it to.
I will. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, I want to just move on. Is it quick? No. Okay. Thank you. Lucy, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you. Thank you. All right. Okay, Kelvin, I want to now do the People Committee upward report, please.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. We had a pretty wholesome discussion around a number of the areas. The report is sort of sets out really that discussion. Can I just raise two areas of focus? And I think Jackie may want to just cover off the people directorate changes as well. So we've made significant progress with the health and safety committee reports. There's a whole raft of safety meetings that take place underneath the health and safety banner, and those now are sort of meeting. We've got regular updates, so we were able to have a kind of pretty robust update when it comes to health and safety across the organisation, and that kind of gives a lot of reassurance around where we are with health and safety in the organisation. And in particular, we've got a fire safety manager, I think, starting by the end of the month, if I'm understanding right. Glyn will correct me there if I'm wrong. So significant progress with health and safety. And the second thing I wanted to raise was the sort of the risks associated with workforce, and we are carrying significant risks when it comes to employees within the organisation and our vacancy rates. But we're all over that when it comes to the IPR and reporting at board level. But we had a report about the things that we're doing to resolve those risks, essentially international recruitment, grow on our own, trying to resolve retention. So yeah, so significant work around that. So Jackie, did you want to cover off the sort of change in your people directorate?
Yeah, very briefly, and thank you. We've managed to find a little pause in delivering to our customers, which has been pretty full on for the last couple of years, to actually recruit and reorganise the people team in support of the people strategy that the board approved some 18 months, 2 years ago. And after the well-deserved promotion of my deputy, Liz Perry, to a board appointment in the Devon system, we've successfully appointed a deputy to be the Chief People Officer. It's going to be Sarah Margaret, who will be joining us in January. Sarah is currently on the board of Sirona, so I'm really excited about that, and I'm really excited the experience that she'll bring of community, and she's got a background of HR in social care as well, and the fact that we're using that sort of cross-system working in that appointment there. We've also appointed a new senior role in my team, which is actually looking at workforce. Workforce will continue to be the primary focus of everything that we do around our people strategy, particularly looking at new ways of attracting, onboarding. That first 18 months, we can see from the monthly figures that we get a turnover, particularly in things like HCA, and we need to really look at what that looks like to keep those people not going out the revolving door. Really relook at our whole attraction and retain. And so that's really important. And I think the final point just to note is that I'm the SRO for workforce across the system. So we will be looking to see how we can quickly join up things like unified banks, international recruitment, and large cross-community recruitment campaigns.
Thank you. Any questions for Kelvin? Glyn?
Just to give a little bit more light about the health and safety side of things, we have now got the 12 subgroups, the safety groups under Health and Safety Committee are now convened with standard terms of reference. They have all met. They've confirmed the terms of reference. They have reviewed all of the risks that are allocated to them. They've rated those risks and come up to the Health and Safety Committee, who have then reviewed those risks to feed on into the People Committee. So I feel much more assured now that that is in place. When we met with the People Committee, we had a fire safety manager starting this month. Unfortunately, they have got some personal health issues and they are leaving the jobs market at the moment to deal with those. So we have gone back out to recruit, and in the meantime, we have called some support in from Bouygues, and we're going to get an independent contractor in to give us. It's more expensive than we would do it ourselves, but we can't fail to make progress. We'll be giving an update on the actions from the fire audit at the next People Committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions on this? Okay, thank you. We will take a 10-minute break. So we will be back at my brain, two.
That's 11 minutes.
Yes, 1:45, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I shall just repeat myself for the benefit of those who didn't have their microphone on, i.e. me. Okay, let's move on. The integrated performance report.
Thank you, Chair. So just I think the first thing to say is that as per the cover paper, there's some changes to the report in the responsive section this month. And that's in response to really good feedback that we've had from over the last few months. And a special thank you to Tim and to Richard, who have been really helpful in helping us shape it go forward. So you'll see the principles that have been set out in the paper there that set out what we've sort of tried to do to try and lean the report and make it more incisive going forward. Now, it's not complete, but we did say we'd bring a version of it back to this month. So this is where it's got to, and we will keep on refining it, probably to a final version next month, if that's okay.
Yep.
Just some general comments on the responsiveness section. I think Maria set out the context for urgent emergency care, very challenging period again, back into quite difficult pressures across the hospital and across the system in that sense, driven really by the continued no criteria to reside numbers being high, also by a re-emergence of COVID admissions increasing from around 10 to around 65, and then associated with that a loss of a further 35 beds to IP and C. So all of this came together to give us a difficult period. Steve and Tim have been extremely helpful in their clinical leadership in terms of instituting some contingency measures to decompress the ED, as Maria has said, and that has brought some benefit for us. But we will need to work at a system level to fundamentally improve flow going forward. A couple of other points of note, planned care, special thank you to all of the teams across the trust for landing the commitment to a zero or breach position for RTT. That's right on what our trajectory was, but it's a month ahead of what the national requirement was as well. So really, really excellent work by those teams. Despite some significant challenges there also, the urgent emergency care pressures affect planned care significantly, and they managed to work their way through that, but also we've had significant operating theatre staff losses due to COVID over the period and continue to have some to some extent as well. So thank you to those teams, and we'll press on with that. Since updating the board last month on cancer, a lot of work has taken place to address some of the underlying plans that we have to improve the sustainability of our cancer performance going forward. There is a lag to that improvement, which will take a few months. Workforce teams have been excellent in onboarding, in recruiting 8 further people to the core cancer team since we last met. And we will need to onboard and train and bring those into the team going forward. And we're working closely and openly with our regional colleagues, securing their support in terms of some process changes to both the process in the cancer team, but also in the tumour site pathways going forward as well. And there's a deep dive arranged for September where we've invited regional colleagues to come and work with us and support that going forward. So we will still see a period of uncertainty for a couple of months whilst those measures take hold in terms of that. But of course, I did provide the board previously with a risk view on cancer and time-related weights, and to monitor those closely without any evidence at this stage that they're having a material impact. And then finally, diagnostics. We will have an opportunity in the next meeting, I know, Chair, to look at diagnostics in some depth. But we have now submitted a plan nationally to comply with the national compliance requirements of no more than 25% of people awaiting a diagnostic more than 6 weeks by the end of the year. You will see trajectories in the report that we're aiming to try to deliver that ahead of plan, but that is to give us some headroom, knowing that we have some uncertainties we'll need to work through as we go towards the end of the year. 2 areas, I think, where we will have significant challenges are endoscopy and in terms of that and cardiac echo. So that's a general Chair, happy to take any questions.
Okay. Tim.
Can I pick up a couple of details on page 90, which is the detailed statistics? First of all, stroke performance. There's a couple of numbers which seem to have dropped quite, one of them dropped quite dramatically, and I just wondered if you could just clarify the reason for that. The other one was the increasingly high trend on caesarean section, which as I seem to remember was around the 30% for quite a long time, 35, sort of now gone up to well over 40%. And the induction numbers, I just wonder if there's any sort of underlying issue around any of that.
Okay. So I'll ask if I can do the second bit, come in on caesarean, if that's okay. So stroke performance is indeed a concern for us. There was some understandable changes to the stroke performance, particularly over COVID, because of the pathway changes through the emergency department. And those changes are starting to be reversed now, which allow us to go back to the time critical pathways. The department had to separate patients between COVID and non-COVID, and therefore the pathway through was more difficult in that. We had our divisional performance reviews yesterday, and Tim and I and Steve had really good conversation with the NBT division in regard to stroke performance, and particularly in regard to time to thrombolysis, which is a key evidence-based time-critical element of the pathway. There are some developments for us as an organisation with stroke. One in terms of thrombectomy, which is more imminent, and the other in terms of us being the HASU, the centralised area for acute stroke going forward. A number of those will bring improvements to the overall pathway, but our discussion with the division yesterday was about how we can improve in advance of that in terms of thrombolysis. So they have given us some assurance that they are going to come back with plans to improve the thrombolysis element of the pathway in the interim while we work through to the wider pathway going forward. So we'll keep you briefed on that. I don't know whether, Tim, you'd want to.
Yes, it's timely because we were having this exact conversation about 24 hours ago with the stroke team. So it's not good enough. I think it's important to say it needs to be better. I completely agree with Steve's assessment in terms of being cared for on a stroke ward, stroke unit due to configuration changes due to COVID and stroke patients having COVID. That has been a metric which has been difficult to really achieve. But the time to thrombolysis does need to be improved. Whilst it's green, it needs to be better than that. We heard a number of issues yesterday regarding complexity of patients. There is a delay to thrombolysis when patients have significant additional comorbidity. Very high blood pressure is one, for example, where we would refrain from thrombolysing within the first hour. There has been an increase in that, but there's generally been a decrease in performance due to not having the correct number of staff in the right place to administer this thrombolysis. So the team are aware, they are working to that. They are determined to improve it, and the other metrics really just point out why we need to have a different model of care for stroke across BNSSG.
Can I just follow up by asking, if this is happening, what impact does this have on our ability to become the main stroke, the HASU, which is what we're committed to?
Well, that decision's already been made.
Yes.
That we will become that. This is a core part of the provision of services against the evidence available.
Yeah.
So the actions we'll be taking in terms of how we reconfigure will allow us to be better placed to deliver the whole stroke pathway, including this. But the discussion we had yesterday, as Tim exactly said, was that our belief was that given this is such a time critical issue, that the current position shouldn't wait for further configuration. There should be efforts to improve that now. And the team recognised that. There was no pushback from that in that sense, because they recognise the importance of the thrombolysis. It's important also to remember that some of these people are given their thrombolysis within minutes of 1 hour. So it's not necessarily that they're waiting a number of hours for that time. It's sometimes 61 minutes, 62 minutes. But we should try and work within the 60 minutes.
Okay,
to pick up the
Cesarean.
cesarean section. So a couple of things. One is the complexity of the women that we're seeing is increasing, and therefore women's choice around cesarean section has increased. The other thing I would say is that we have moved away fairly significantly from any judgment about whether cesarean section rates are high or low, on the basis that Shrewsbury and Telford delivered a lower cesarean section rate, and the board thought that was good, to the detriment of women. So at this point, we can describe the changes in terms of complexity and women's choice, but we shouldn't make any judgment about whether that's high or low at this point.
I think that's very helpful. I suppose the subsequent question is, what does that mean for the staffing and capacity of the maternity units and the theatres that are involved in this, which presumably are going to get ever busier if we stay at this rate, because this is a very substantial increase in the proportion of women who may have complex needs, but who are going to take up space in these units.
Yeah, and it is changing our approach to how we staff our maternity units. The team have been doing their business planning and mapping capacity and demand to ensure that they have sufficient space. We have some new theatre space over in Women's and Children's, which can be used in those events where maternity theatres are not being half full. But I think as we move forward, our approach around midwifery staffing will change. If you remember,
and sort of
and obstetricians as well. Yeah, absolutely. You'll know that a couple of years ago, the focus was around continuity of care, and that's waned slightly over recent times because of Shrewsbury and Telford. I think my sense is we're developing a staffing model nationally that hasn't quite caught up to the complexity of women that are now choosing to have babes. And I think that will change progressively over the coming years. But it is having a slight impact on our service, because of course we'll need more recovery space, for example, which the team are working.
Does this mean I suppose it's something we need to keep an eye on over the next, I'm interested in where this is going to take us in terms of, our capacity and our ability to respond, really.
Absolutely. Any other questions, Steve, before we move on? No? Okay, let's go on to safety and effectiveness. Tim and Steve Hams.
Shall I start?
Yeah, please do.
So keeping on the maternity theme, just because of the perinatal quality surveillance monitoring tool is here, and I think just to highlight a couple of things out of this. The prompt training, which is the essential training that midwives and obstetric teams do to ensure that they can deal with obstetric emergencies, was fairly low and has steadily increased. It's currently at, for June, it was 60%, but I know that they gave an absolute commitment that by the end of June, early July, that would be closer to 95 or 100%, give and take those that are off on long-term sick. So they've worked hard to ensure that all midwives and obstetric colleagues have training. A couple of other things just to say in terms of recruitment. Midwifery recruitment is good, and we're looking forward to the new midwives starting in September. And we currently have 2 obstetric posts out, which again is good because it adds to the obstetric group. Just to say that we've had a number of HSIB referrals in recent weeks, which we are looking at. In fact, we've asked HSIB to look at those with us because there seems to have been a cluster of them fairly close together, which is unusual, but we are taking those very seriously and looking at those. And then I think finally to say, 2 things finally to say is, one is that we have identified some areas of improvement focus around our antenatal clinic, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, but just for awareness. And then we have our insight visit with NHS England in 2 weeks' time. This is a rolling set of insight visits that are being done to all maternity services by NHS England off the back of the Shrewsbury and Telford review. So as you would expect, our team are preparing for that. We have had conversations with UHPW because they've already had their review, just in terms of things that they're looking at. The final thing I will say is the environment in some of our areas, particularly on this side, wouldn't meet the required standards, but working with Glyn and his team particularly around central delivery suite to ensure they're more appropriately, the environment's more appropriate for birthing women. I think that's probably all to say on that. And then just a couple of other things around safety and effectiveness. We've seen a slight increase in the number of device-related pressure ulcers. That's largely in our intensive care unit, and we had a conversation with Shelley, the Divisional Director of Nursing, yesterday, and we'll look at the improvement work there, but particularly to find out what's going on. And then there has been, as Tim has said, a slight resurgence of the COVID cases, although that we think has probably now peaked as we come towards the end of July. And we have some other bugs to deal with, which are actually slightly more enjoyable in a strange way than having to deal with COVID. But generally, C. difficile rates and other rates are within expected range, and nothing concerning at this point.
Yes, so just to dovetail from that conversation, so I think people may recall we did have a C. difficile spike on previous last year, and we were very concerned about it. We worked locally and regionally, so I'm delighted to see that we're sort of on trajectory. It's never good to have a C. diff case, but it's reassuring to know that it's within our boundaries. Moving on to VT compliance is an area of great concern for me personally. I'd hope to see the trend stabilised and improving by this time. I did mention at the last board that I'm going to have to extend that period, please, because whilst the introduction of the new EPR is all going well, we're yet to dive into and see whether it has helped to fix our recording of VT assessments. So at every DPR that we've done, and every DPR we've done over the last 2 days, I've asked them to bring to us a report of a spot audit of VT, and it would appear that in every division, VTE risk assessment compliance varies between 93 and 98%. Currently on our electronic system, it would appear that our performance has deteriorated further and is now lower than 93%. So there is clearly an issue regarding the reality and the reporting. So that is a work in progress. I'm working with our colleagues to try to ensure that our new system can account for that. I've asked for a further spot audit. This is very important because VT clearly is compliance means we're addressing preventable illness. Medication errors, we have had, whilst the numbers of medication errors remain around the same, and we can't seem to budge that down, I'm pleased to report that serious errors, harm and death are slightly reduced, which is good to see, and our hospital mortality figures remain good. We'll come on to some learning from deaths later, but just to always, at this stage, I reassure you that our hospital mortality indicator, SHIMI, is in the top quartile. Thank you.
Glenn?
Yeah, just to give the board some assurance around the status issues that Steve mentioned in women and children's, the improvement in the health and safety subcommittees is really helping get the focus on things that are risks that are not acceptable. And so we have got one caretaker, Steve, which is more than one person who is on at women and children's addressing issues around the added complexities that we can't plan on having access to a room on a certain date, because if a woman turns up and needs to deliver a child, then that needs to happen. But to work flexibly with the team, fixing around the important patient flow. We've also upped some of the scheduled routine maintenance to prevent some of the recurrent issues that have happened around drainage. So we have 2 programmes of work, one around the estate on this site, and the second one independently running, addressing the community midwifery issues that we've been talking about in the previous board.
Okay. Any questions? Sorry.
One for you, Steve, which is CPE not a problem for us now in infection control? I had noted it at one point. Has it been eradicated?
It's certainly within normal limits. It's not been a topic of conversation for the IPC team, in fact, since I've been here.
Right. And then the other one was just the high risk drugs, Tim, the control drug incident uplift, which is quite serious.
Yeah. So it's noted, whether it's within a trend line or whether it's a real sort of, or if it's within normal variation or whether it's a trend, I think needs a bit further analysis. The Director of Pharmacy, Matthew, is very aware of this. I meet with him regularly. We've got a number of actions to audit the use of controlled drugs more thoroughly. It is noted. If I can offer you any assurance, I've got no clinical concern that has translated to any.
Can I just very quickly talk about the WHO checklist compliance? And I know reasons why, don't get from 98 to 100. I'm just recall the conversation the CQC had with me when they came about why we couldn't hit 100%, and quote, you wouldn't get on an aeroplane that couldn't comply with 100% safety check. Why are your patients going into theatre where we're not doing it? Why? What's the data capture issue? What is it actually the problem?
So, this is one of my favourite topics, Michelle. So, where can I start? So, firstly, we know 5 years ago we were failing the standard, and we've been able to bring that back around. In fact, Lucy Kirkham worked with me to help to reverse that trend to bring it back into an acceptable number. The challenge has always been to make it 100%. The simple answer is...
I'm just getting ready, you see. So when they say to me, why is it, I can give them the answer.
So it is the recording of some of our local anaesthetic day case minor procedures.
Okay.
Dermatology theatres,
okay.
Skin cancer, which do not require WHO checklist, but because they are recorded at times inappropriately as being operations,
yes,
they bring our data down.
Okay, great.
That is the simple answer.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Are there any other questions on this element? Okay, let's move on then to the patient experience, Steve.
Yeah, thank you. And again, a similar picture from last month. Overall number of concerns coming into the organisation through our health service has plateaued slightly. So we've moved away from the peak that we've had. And my sense is, in just wandering around the hospital, there's much more accessibility both to our senior nursing leaders, particularly who are wearing their vibrant red jackets, but also my sense is we're engaging much more, particularly with those patients in the emergency department, some of our areas of hotspots. Overall complaint performance has just dropped slightly, but continues to be within the range of around about 80%. Have just changed that process slightly, thanks to Maria's team, just to ensure that we are absolutely clear about the answers that we're providing back to patients. Not that we weren't before, but I think we've just become slightly sharper on that, which is good to see. And the number of what we call comebacks from patients has remained static and in part reducing slightly. So I think if we're able to answer patients' concerns right at the outset, it reduces people coming back and people's frustration, and of course more work for our team. That's all I wanted to add. Happy to take questions.
Just Kelly, on that, Steve, I don't know if this is something that you review in the patient and carer committee, but what I don't get a sense of from the report is, in terms of the corrective action or the interventions as a result, what are they? Because we say we've got recovery plans and trajectories in place, and that feels very much like getting through the complaints in terms of responding to them. But then if we said and asked anyone in the organisation, what are the top 3 things that we're doing to improve patient experience? that we as a board have awareness of and just monitor progress? So what would they be?
Yeah, thank you. So we do that through the patient experience committee. I think my sense is many of the complaints relate to local issues. So if we ask that question to a ward team about their most recent complaint, they'll be able to give you a sense about what they have done as a result of the complaint. From a broad trust perspective, I think we have focused a lot on those areas and groups of patients where they need special adaptations and minor alterations, so autism and learning disability, for example, which is good. But I think the area that we have identified that needs additional focus around our general group of patients, so our ward patients, for example, and those coming into outpatients. We had a really good conversation yesterday in terms of the Friends and Family Test around orthopaedics, because it shines out like a big sore thumb in terms of people's experience. And having wandered around orthopaedic outpatients, I can see why. Because it is just, is rammed a loud word?
Absolutely.
It's rammed.
Yeah.
So we're working, so this is an interesting one. So we have two sets of teams working on this because outpatients is run by core clinical services, orthopaedics and MSK. So the team have come together and are working on the improvement plan to make that a better experience. Of all of our outpatient services, orthopaedic outpatients is the one that sticks out like a sore thumb. So if we can sort that one out, then we can learn from that and move across to other areas. The areas of focus for wards at the moment is around operational flow. And I need to be clear, we are doubling up in some side rooms where what we call boarding or reverse boarding some patients. We're doing that safely, and we've done the risk assessment that helps us reduce the safety risk, but we acknowledge and recognise that it increases the patient experience risk. And it's that really tricky balance that we've had around privacy and dignity and patient experience, coupled with patient safety. And I'm heartened that our team tried to do both. But I think what we've been trying to do as an exec team is give them really the freedom to make the clinical decisions that are right for their groups of patients. And I think, give them a bit of air cover, because there are times, and I've had this week where I've been talking to our ward leaders in medicine. There were, in fact, Steve and I were there, 40 of them in a room, and what they say is they're unhappy and sad that they can't deliver the care that they feel that they want to give. And I get that, and we acknowledge that. In fact, Maria acknowledged it yesterday in her chief exec's message yesterday. So we are working hard to not only deliver the improvements in emergency care, but also on our wards. But that's where a number of our concerns are coming through from patients and families, which I get, but we're working hard to sort that out.
So I've just had a friend go through our orthopaedic team and our outpatients, and absolutely, their insight into what that experience was like was really fascinating.
Yeah. I think that was going to be my challenge, which is I understand the difficulties. I think it, particularly in this incredibly pressurised time, it's being really clear about it. It's back to controlling the controllables. There are some things like volume you absolutely can't control, and that is inevitably going to have a detrimental impact. But then there are some things that are very much within our control, particularly around, I think a massive one would be around communication, even just explaining the context of the volume, which to some people will be more obvious than others. The volume and just the classic bit about what the issue is, what the next steps are, and what needs to be true. And I think those are the things that are controllable, but in very busy environments get forgotten. And I just wonder, and the reason I call that out is those things, my suggestion would be, it would be helpful to reinforce and us all to have a view on. And if we can do one thing, it is focus on its communication.
Might respond. I mean, I entirely agree, Kelly, and I think as a relative or a patient, that's absolutely what I'd want. And this isn't defending where we are, but I think if we were to do a guardian of safe working practice for nursing at the moment on our wards, the number of gaps we have is quite significant, and we're adding more patients in. And again, we've carefully assessed that risk to try and mitigate it as best we can. But we had, in the meeting we had with the ward leaders, we were saying about the importance of communication, working together as a team. But when when a 34 bedded ward has 4 extra patients and we can't get any more nurses or any more healthcare assistants, there are some things that aren't quite right, and we focus on safety.
I think that's all absolutely true and wise. I think some of the communication issues we have are long before people are ever in a hospital bed. You know, multiple letters, multiple different versions of what time you're meant to arrive. You know, mismatch between when the consultant will see you and when you're going to have the diagnostic to enable the consultant to tell you what they're going to do. And all of that is reflected through outpatients. So I think, you know, that and none of that communication element affects the ward staff, and you know, maybe there is room there to be.
And one small example, Claire, if I may, actually, Kelly, it was one of your suggestions. So as we started the double up process and the boarding process, we now give a letter, stroke leaflet to all of our patients in ED that says, we're really sorry, but there may be occasions where you may have to share a room with another person or be slotted in somewhere. And one of the things that we've purposely done is it's my name on it, not the nurses, because what we're finding is our nurses are getting holiday for not giving somebody their own room, and I don't want that. That, you know, I'm the one they should be hollering at, the nurses. And it's surprising that, Maria, you and I went around ED a couple of days ago, and just that one small intervention has actually given them the kind of freedom to go, okay, somebody's got my back, somebody's going to help.
I do say, if I may, there are a number of themes that come out of complaints, and they are sort of, you know, nationwide, really. Timely access, communication, staff attitude, occasionally food, occasionally noise at night, parking, outpatient administration and follow-up. And I think they are the things that we do need to have a thematic response to. There are the things that are lifted out of divisions that we probably need to spend a bit more time. You know, there's always a new priority, but absolutely, I think we need to commit to that via our patient experience and engagement work.
Calvin, did you have your hand up and then put it down again?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're constantly learning in this space. I mean, for instance, the biggest number of complaints we've had over a period of time has been access to services, as you would imagine, when you've got you know, you've got thousands of people waiting on a waiting list. And then also, given the sort of utilisation of the hospital, when it's up at 98%, we then end up having issues that are over people's individual treatment. So I mean, these are kind of common themes related to a hospital under massive pressure. That's not to say we shouldn't learn from improving our communication, helping people through that process and all the rest of it. And we do get quite a lot of that stuff reported to our committee. But nevertheless, I think that we're right to question it still and continue to question it. But I think some of these things won't be resolved until we get on top of the backlogging and resolve it, until we get to a position where we've got, you know, additional capacity as per the elective treatment centre, etc. So, you know, until we've got more capacity, better discharge and the rest of it, I think we're going to have some of these themes moving forward.
Thank you. Okay, let's. Sorry, Richard.
Patients on waiting lists, do we actually survey them to ask them what their experience is being on a waiting list and how they're dealt with and treated? Some of these themes, I think, they would probably highlight, you know, would dovetail with some of the things you're saying, Maria. Would we actually ask them how their experience is?
So there are a number. So there's a couple of things that is becoming more of a requirement as well as something we want to do. For example, for everybody waiting over certain periods now, we're writing to them, and if we can't get them in the next time period, to check in with that. We have the normal processes of where our clinicians are prioritising our lists in terms of that. But there are a number of electronic methods now that are coming out that we're exploring, which allows patients to recognise that they may not be seen immediately, but interact with us in a way that helps them keep as well as possible on the waiting list in terms of doing that. So I suppose we're doing it through a lens of well-being and risk, as opposed to anything else, Richard, but it does allow us, or will allow us, to do that.
Are we keeping in touch with the full 40,000 people? No, we're not. But there is a stratification there, I suppose, that is allowing us to keep in touch with those that we think in groups that may come to harm as a result of waiting.
But we're not routinely surveying their level of satisfaction. Not.
No.
Okay, let's go on to our lead. Jackie and Tim, is there anything specific you want to pull out of this?
Just really to underpin about our workforce, the sort of trend is that our biggest factor is growing. We've gone from 7.5 to 8.1, turnover gone from 17.28 to 17.4. So you can see, while it doesn't look up, the trend is very worrying. I mean, sickness has gone up. We had a big COVID sort of May, June, which has actually gone down. But just to sort of emphasise with data, the sort of pressure that's on those nurses and doctors coming to the wards, we lost 931 days of staff time due to COVID over that period. And I mean, we're really pushing on agency, not using agency, which is great, and we are beginning to really put other things in place. So that's very declined by 2.8%. But the other side of that, we've had over 11% of shifts unfilled, and that again is putting increasing pressure on our workforce. So we are very, very concerned. It's at a level that far exceeds where we were in the height of COVID. So I'll be bringing back a paper to the board in August about managing our staff through turbulent times. Huge amount of work that we're doing. I'm working alongside Steve for a whole load of incentives for our nursing and HCA workers to attract people, actually retain them and incentivise them. A whole lot of stuff about reducing the cost of employment, because one of the real big turnover factors and exit is just the economic situation that we find ourselves in. With inflation 9% and above, we've got Amazon paying over £14 an hour. We're in a national framework here, so really trying to revisit our employee value proposition. I'm working alongside Glyn, doing lots of stuff about reducing parking, subsidised food, lease hire, nursery, all of those things. We've also got pressures on the top end of our workforce with an elderly workforce that's beginning to retire. Pensions are actually exacerbating that even more. So we'll try and bring a paper together that looks at all those different sections of our workforce and the many things that we're doing to address.
That would be really helpful. That'll come in August. Yes. Yeah, great. Thank you. Tim.
How is the agency and bank pool standing up? Because it's going to be very reliant upon that during winter. And I suppose, and given the national trends and some of the shortages, I think more broadly, is there any indication whatsoever from the National Centre? I know the parliamentary committee highlighted the workforce issue as perhaps almost one of the number one issues for health. Where is there any sense that anybody's going to concentrate on doing anything from a national perspective on addressing any of this?
Want me to say this at public board? The national team are aware. The national team are well aware, but we are in a national agenda for change. There is no money coming over the hill. There's the big national conversation about aligning social care, which is a huge part of this ecosystem. And when you hear us talk about our operational numbers, which is out with us at the moment, at system level where we do have some influence, I'm leading the workforce. We're doing a lot of work where we can align recruitment campaigns to support both community and social care, because for us that's part of what can we do to relieve pressure on ourselves and the system. But it's a wicked situation. In fact, the economic situation with the inflation rising, so all of the pay rates are not going to be the answer. Steve is doing huge amounts of work with incentivising, but actually even the agencies, even at that top level of pay rate, they actually can't fill. Even they can't get the staff now. That's where we are.
Richard.
Jackie, you're saying vacancy rates now over 8%, I think. So I guess I could do the maths. We got sort of approximately 9,000 employees. That's roughly 700 vacancies we've got. And then we've got level 6 coming on board soon. So I guess you've got another 260, 300 coming on, so that's about 1,000. Is that kind of right? It's quite useful to have a little table that sort of says what our vacancies are. I appreciate it.
But some of these are new posts, so they're vacancies, brand new posts, so they're not a living vacancy, if you like. So the fact is, yes, we are doing a lot of recruitment. So part of that is actually how do we actually fast track recruitment? We're doing job fairs, but it's actually how do we process people much quicker? You know, things like DBS checks are one of the real blockers to get people in really quickly. And we're increasing our international nursing recruitment, which we've increased that dramatically. And we're very good at doing that. We've got a really good pipeline.
My point was just, it would be quite useful just to have a little box that says total vacancies by division, speciality, pipeline, and because if, as Tim said, you know, it's one of the key thing in the NHS staffing vacancies.
I mean, there's layers of detail.
I appreciate that, and I can see some of it's there with nursing where you put it, but just to have it in one place in one table, what our total vacancies were and where the pipeline is, I think would be quite useful, as that's the key concern.
I think what's probably more useful, Richard, is to show you the trend analysis, because they've given you a table, it's just a snapshot of data. So perhaps, but we will make sure we put some trend analysis.
Like that.
Okay, Maria. Just a clarification actually on the turnover at the 17+%. So if we've got AHPs with there being the largest increase, are there groups much above that then that pull the average up much higher?
Other groups are you asking?
Well, which group has got the highest turnover?
The highest turnover is the allied health professionals, in particular therapists, radiographers, and in particular the subgroup of therapy is speech and language therapy, and then the other group is the HCAs, and we are losing HCAs.
So that's a proportion within that 70%?
Yes.
Exactly. Okay.
If I did a pie chart of the 17%, that's
okay. Thank you.
It's interesting. Look, Cornwall turnover is 17.75% now, and a large number of people are leaving to join health service. At the moment. Yeah. And so because they don't working from home all the time, and factors like that.
No. And that's that whole attract piece is absolutely critical. All those tiny things to get those people.
Because the dynamic of younger staff. It's all very well for people who got homes and got established, making the day more comfortable. But for younger staff, they don't actually, many of them don't want to work from home all the time. They don't feel comfortable. So even if Cornwall recruit, they don't tend to stay. They get poached by private sector or by health service.
So Sandra is asking how successful we are at attracting back people who've been here as students.
We're very successful, and we're very successful at attracting all of our recruitment campaigns, and we've got multi-supply chains, and we're really trying to, we're doing an awful lot of work with 13-year-olds in the community. We're targeting people, we're working with government departments to target people that have been unemployed for a large amount of time, with a small group of women's refuges, and offering those people paid £50 traineeships per week. The conversion rate, very small seed corn at the moment, but then we can onto the bank, and indeed the success rate of those has been 83%. So we really want to leverage that with all of our consultant interviews. That many of you, Neds, will have sat on the panels. It's very high. What the problem is for us is to actually get those people in through the door really quickly. We'll do a job fair on a Monday. Generation Y want to start with no paperwork on Friday, and that's where our systems have got to really get slick to really make sure that we don't lose people. And the onboarding piece, we're bringing HCAs to the
Yes. How do we integrate them into what we're doing?
How do we make them into cohorts so they
absolutely,
and how do we use sort of immersive training to really support them?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move us on. Glyn, is there anything specifically in this other than the fact the money's going in the wrong direction?
No, but I think we can pick this up in the update from the Finance and Performance Committee in a bit more detail.
Okay, so there's nothing in this you particularly want to draw attention?
No.
Okay. Are there any questions on this, or we pick the rest of it up in? So are we happy to sign the regulatory compliance statement? Yes, happy with that? Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on then to the green plan. The ICS green plan, no less. I think Trisha's going to come in and join us.
Yeah, I think David's just gone to get Trisha and Meg. So perhaps if I just introduce it while they're coming in. So NBT have taken the lead within the ICS in developing initially a green plan for the trust alone. It was recognised that we were sort of leading the field, and so we've accepted the challenge of picking up, taking the lead on this from an ICS perspective. So under Trish's guidance, we've now gone out and recruited an ICS sustainability, and we are starting to get some really good cross-system work in people aligning. And there's lots of things that we will do so much better at scale and then working across the piece. So we're taking the lead on it. This has been through Healthier Together. Chief Executive is now coming through each organisation to say actually everyone is endorsing this. So do we stand behind it? And what does it really mean on the ground for NBT? So I'll hand over to Trish.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you.
And welcome, Megan.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you for the preamble, Glenn. I'm going to hand over to Megan to go through the slide because Meg's done a huge amount of work on this. But just to say, really excited that we're engaging massively as a system. So we've been working with UHBW, AWP and Sirona. And so the work of the Green Plan is made up of lots of organisations together, but particularly with Sam Willits coming in as our head of sustainability. We are going to merge our teams effectively. So we will have a team that spans across UHBW and NBT with a single governance structure, because there's no point in us doing the same things in each trust. We might as well get efficiencies from that, and we're working really well together. So hopefully that's a sort of a blueprint for working in the future. So I'll hand over to Megan for the Green Plan.
Thank you. So yeah, I've just pulled together a few slides on the ICS Green Plan and kind of the context of it and the specific chapters as well. So I think this one, yeah. So the scope of the Green Plan itself, Bristol, North Somerset and South Gloss region, so the Healthier Together ICS, and it's basically just a partnership that provide health and social care. We've initially started the Green Plan just based off Sirona, NBT, UHBW and AWP. So that's just kind of the foundation of how we're going to kind of build this plan. And then the future plan is just bring wider partners into that. So yeah, that is the scope of it. So what is the actual vision of the ICS Green Plan? So we've actually managed to get one of the strategic aims to be sustainability focused. The actual ICS gets established. So kind of the main aim of the ICS Green Plan is to be a lead institution in driving sustainable healthcare. So we're going to do this by improving our environment, achieving our net zero carbon, improving the quality of our natural environment and driving efficiency of resource use. So yeah, the diagram, which you can't see very well from here, but it shows kind of what mutual benefits we're going to achieve through this. So through like driving efficiency, it's not only going to help our staff and patients' health and our community health, but we also expect kind of financial savings as well to come out of this and just operating more efficiently as a healthcare system. So we've also identified 3 key outcomes as well that we want to deliver from our Green Plan. So the 3 main ones there are improving our environment, achieving our net zero carbon goal and generating a region-wide kind of movement. So we kind of like want to build momentum with our like staff, patients and our community so that people kind of feel empowered to take action and that they feel that they have play an important role in this Green Plan. So the delivery of our outcomes, how are we going to deliver our outcomes? So we're going to do this through our leadership, our ambition, and how clear we are with our vision. We're also going to create the right conditions of change, make sure it's easy for people to actually make these changes, putting in the right kind of processes. And we're also going to aim to kind of mitigate the highest impacts first. So we're going to evaluate where can we have the biggest kind of difference. And then, yeah, our insurance of the devolved delivery as well. So I'm just going to quickly flick through the main kind of aspects of the Green Plan. So it focuses on all the different areas of sustainability. So the biggest one, which contributes the most to our carbon footprint, is supply chain and procurement. So this is just any services, goods that we buy in, any kind of contracts that we create, that kind of thing. And as you can see from the pie chart, not very well, is the acute trusts are the ones that contribute the most to this. So yeah, in each chapter, the way we've done it is laying out the ambition, the pledges and commitments for the year ahead. So yeah, just pulling out what our ambition is for supply chain and procurement. We're going to try and drive our supply chain to net zero, so engaging our suppliers in this, making sure they're on the same path as us, and using our spend as a positive influence in our community as well. So that kind of anchoring the community goal, and promoting a fair, diverse and inclusive supply chain as well. So for medicines, this is our second largest contributor to our carbon footprint. The majority of this is primary care, so they have the greatest influence over this kind of impact. So once again, just going to go through the quick ambitions of that. So our ambition is to reduce the overuse of medicines and reduce our medicines waste, switching to lower impact alternatives where possible, and kind of informing patients as well where lower carbon alternatives are available. And driving change in the manufacture of our medicines as well through our procurement approach. So the next biggest one is estates and facilities. So again, this acute trusts contribute the most to this. Our ambition here is to upgrade and renew buildings and infrastructure to decarbonise our estates and to optimise the way that we use buildings, making sure we're using them to like the optimum capacity. And changing our energy source to 100% renewable across all of our sites. Travel and transport. So again, this is acute trusts that contribute quite largely to this through our fleet, but also how staff and patients travel to our sites as well. So our ambition is to significantly reduce the impact this has on air quality and promote and enable active travel to improve well-being.
Keep going, I'm just going to stop.
So yeah, with the next one is digital transformation. So this is kind of what we're seeing with Careflow Connect at the minute. So digitalising our like clinical systems, kind of metering, that sort of thing. Our ambition is to become an exemplar of digitally advanced ICS, maximise the positive environmental benefits of digital enablers, and minimise the impact our digital infrastructure has on the environment as well through our procurement approach. So sustainable models of care is another chapter. So this is essentially just looking at how we make our patient pathways more sustainable, the way that we deliver care, how can we make it more efficient. Our ambition is to help people stay well and independent in their community, providing early help and support that is personalised to them and also proactive, minimising hospital stay, enabling a system of support for patients to get them back home, and helping people to get back being well and independent once they are back home. Looking at workforce and system leadership. So this is how we're going to be a leader in sustainability. So we need a clear leadership approach to delivering this plan. And we also need to make sure we're developing all of our people at all levels of the organisation to make them have the right skills to be able to live this plan. In terms of food and nutrition, so this is quite an important one in terms of carbon footprint, but also kind of the health of our patients and staff. Our ambition here is to positively contribute to local environmental and population health through the food that we're able to provide. In climate change adaptation, so this is how do we adapt our services, our infrastructure and our people to be able to cope with the impacts of climate change. So we're going to identify what our shared climate change risks are across the ICS, implement an action plan to mitigate these risks and build resilience to these impacts. In terms of biodiversity, so we declared an ecological emergency in 2020. So it's kind of fulfilling our duty to conserve and enhance biodiversity through our estate, and promoting the use of our green and blue spaces for staff, patients, visitors, our local community. So yeah, looking at the governance and delivery of the plan itself. So we've kind of come up with an initial idea of how the reporting structure of this is going to look. So we already have an ICS Green Plan steering group that's actually meeting tomorrow, and will be chaired by Glyn. But we need to kind of figure out how are we going to have these working and delivery groups underneath that report into that structure. And then, yeah, how are we going to make sure that we do achieve the ambitions that we've set out? So yeah, we have an executive-led ICS Green Plan. We have a head of sustainability in place now as well, and we kind of want to have a ICS steering group as well. So looking at the finance and resourcing, which will be quite a huge part of this plan. So we've laid out all of our ambitions. It's going to take a lot of investment for us to be able to deliver these. So yeah, this is going to be quite significant to ensure we achieve our ambitions. There will be considerable financial and non-financial value from more sustainably. So we expect to make savings through this. At present, we don't have a detailed picture of the financial circumstances, like revenue implications, or the source of funds to meet this, but this will be developed over the course of the next financial year. And yeah, we will ensure that in assessing these financial implications of the plan, we'll account for kind of what the implications of taking action compared to if we weren't to take action. So next steps for this plan. So at the minute, the plan is getting taken through each of the organisations in the ICS through their kind of governance structures. And we're in the process of establishing what the governance structure is going to look like, the steering group, what is that agenda going to be, how are we going to drive and kind of monitor the progress we're making as well. We need primary care at the minute don't have a sustainability team. They don't have any sustainability leads. So it's looking at how do we kind of build that resource for them. And yeah, we're looking at what priority projects can we actually begin to work on now, where we already kind of have that kind of teams in place to drive that. So things like that is our fleet vehicles and estate decarbonisation. Another really important factor of this plan and how we're going to make it, how we're going to make sure everyone's aware of the plan and what role they play is the engagement piece. So how we're going to engage our staff, our citizens, our patients and the wider community. And yeah, we're kind of at consultation phase at the minute with the plan where we're asking our academic partners to look through it, going through a proper consultation process. And then, yeah, the next thing, which was one of our key outcomes, is building that region-wide social movement and kind of mobilising our staff and patients to kind of take action with this. And yeah, making it easy for staff to do the right thing.
Thank you.
Can I just?
Yeah.
So I just want to thanks, Meg, for taking us through a lot of work and summarising it really well. I just want to say this isn't a soft, fluffy, can do alongside things. We have got to make this part of how we do things. It is really, really massive. So we're going to see a SIP saving within NBT of £1 million this year by replacing a dirty great gas boiler that generates loads of steam and putting modern heating, which is going to improve the air quality for the population that we are currently contaminating with loads of carbon. This is going to be really significant, and what this plan is looking to do is to split the parts that each part of the system has got the biggest impact on, and say, right, 80-20, what can you do about your bit, what can you do about you when you're the biggest chunk of it, to try and then pull it all together and all share the learning across there. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Okay, go on, Maria, and then I'll ask mine.
Well, absolutely fantastic, hugely ambitious and right to be so. Absolutely not motherhood and apple pie, you're saying, Glyn. I'm just looking at the sustainable models of care bit, where the plan is to reduce length of stay, minimise time in hospital. What are the metrics that will sit around that? And, you know, is there a how will that happen plan? Because we haven't been able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is an absolute challenge, Maria, and I think some of these areas we are going to struggle with finding metrics that are going to really work for us. And I think going back to Glyn's point about the 80-20, I think we've really got to focus on where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck and really focus on that. And sustainable models of care, I think, will come, but I don't think they're going to be the areas that we're going to be able to focus on, because I think that the margin of gain will be smaller than some of the other areas where we can put our investment in up front.
I suppose there's so much fantastic stuff in here. There were bits that I thought perhaps sat outside.
Yeah.
and might have other kind of work programs around them, although absolutely agree it's an efficiency. But no, other than that, absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Tim?
Yes, I just wondered, in terms of business case development, I may have missed it, but how much of a factor is this now going to be in terms of business case appraisal and development? Is it going to be an essential prerequisite for all business cases? And what level of emphasis is going to be used? I mean, I know it's not an easy question to answer that, but I mean, how big a factor do you think this should start being in our appraisal of business cases?
So we're going to, sorry.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say, we're going to be biased on this, but we have been discussing it within the ICS. And we believe that actually, if we're going to make the step change we need to do across the world, it has to be like a pass-fail. So business cases have a pass-fail on sustainability. There would be reasons why it still goes through, even if it fails, but we'd rather it was set as a pass-fail, and then we look at the reason why it's failed and whether that then becomes acceptable. It sort of feels like, I mean, lots of the other sort of weightings, if you say, well, it has a 25% weighting, that's not going to be enough, is it? Because the only way we're going to drive change is by saying, no, you can't do that unless you give us a really, really clear reason why you have to do it. If it's going to deliver more carbon, more carbon, for example.
So
absolutely, we would love you to say, yes, you agree.
So I'm aiming on introducing something that says that if it doesn't, whatever change we make through a business case process, it has to reduce our carbon footprint as a pass-fail. If you're proposing something that's going to increase our carbon footprint, there's got to be something really moving it on another axis for us to say that we would do that. We're also looking to capture carbon, the carbon footprint of all of the products that we procure, so that as part of the procurement process, we're evaluating carbon footprint of the product. So if you've got one set of gloves that produces twice as much as the other, even if it's slightly more expensive, do we go with the supplier that is investing in low carbon processes for them to try to help us move that way?
Does this match with national drives for modular buildings? I recognise modern modular buildings are now much more energy efficient than they used to be, but they're probably still not the ultimate design standard to get sustainable building.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it is a challenge because modular providers haven't necessarily focused on this so much. We've set, so for example, the elective centre, which I know will be discussed separately, we have set a net zero carbon target for that we expect to be delivered. Some of the modular providers are saying they can do it, but I think there is an issue about embodied carbon, though, so that the way in which a modular building is constructed, which has basically got two frames joined together, means there's more embodied carbon. So inherently there are problems with a modular solution, but companies are telling us that they can now deliver.
That might fail Glyn's test then, mightn't it?
Sorry?
That might fail Glyn's test when we get to it.
May well do, yeah, let's hope not.
John?
So it was just to add, I think this business, I mean, I think Glyn's described approach is exactly right, and it won't surprise you, it's what we're doing here at MRC and UKRI. And at national level, there is join up between us, other funders and NHS so that we can share best practice. So, I mean, I guess we all support it, but I think this perhaps slightly aggressive approach to it is the only way right now that we can achieve effective change.
Thank you. Okay, I've just got a question about the ICS and how the governance of this works. So we as an organisation have done amazing things around sustainability in the time I've been here. And we've had a very strong plan of our own and a view about how we were going to do it. It appears to me now that is becoming part of an ICS plan. Significant financial and resource investment. So how is the money going to work? I'll probably look to Glyn for this. So are we now in a system where we get told what the sustainability targets are for us? Or, I mean, how does the governance of this work for us as a board?
We set our own targets, and I think that within the ICS, we're saying this is the direction of travel and the rate that we're trying to agree to. If a part of the ICS wants to go at odds to that, to say actually AWP, for instance, may say, well, because of financial constraints, I've got to do X, Y, or Z. Well, in that case, that needs the discussion from the sustainability leads across the ICS to say, is that something that we can support, or is there something else that somewhere else in the system can do to support?
Okay,
try to offset.
so sorry, I'm just going to challenge you slightly because I want to be absolutely clear on this. So we as a board make a decision which is at odds with the ICS sustainability view, but it's done for all the right reasons. Who has the final shout on that? Do we have a final shout as a board, or does the ICS have it under its sustainability plan?
We are a sovereign organisation that has signed up to the green plan, so we would have to explain why we are.
But nobody could stop. Okay, and in terms of the financial resource investment, is it the view that that comes out of the system or that comes out of the individual organisations?
The system is funding certain roles within this group, so this team is now coming together and start to develop plans. What I'd like to do, and I'm not there yet, is to try and find a way of recycling savings that we get through sustainability changes can be recycled back in to fund the team the next step.
Okay, and how does it get reported to us as a board? Work of the ICS board, what's the process for us knowing what we're committing to?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of government, still working through how that might work, and we'd like to come back with a proposal if that's okay.
What I'd like to start doing is reporting a subset of CIP that also have a sustainability.
Okay, well, any CIP would be good. Okay, sorry, Maria.
I've just got one, because we're an integrated care system. So where are the councils in this? Because they have their own one city programme already. How do we?
Yeah.
We're not double counting here, are we?
No, so we're already engaged with the councils. So I sit on the One City Environment Board that meets every couple of months, I think it is. And we are sharing the work that we're doing with the councils. So increasingly, what we've ended up doing is a small sort of core of the trusts that have been working on this with Serona. We've sort of done a lot of work. What we want to do is now sort of go into the other levels to get everybody bought into it. Primary care is a big issue, as Megan said, because they don't have the resources. We've got the expertise within the acute trusts. We want to help. But I mean, as Maria said, as Michelle has said, there is an issue about how we apportion funding to make sure that the acute trusts aren't sort of paying for it all. We're looking at a way of achieving that.
Could I just make one last thing? So I'd just like to note the work that Meg has done. We've had a lot of turnover in the team, and Meg has stepped up and has filled various holes over the last 3 months and has really helped move this forward. So a huge thank you from me.
Sarah, have you got a question?
Thank you for the work. It's really good. It's really vital that we do this, obviously. So just a reflection on how we take our patients and carers with us on this. Some of it means that your experience as a patient might be different. You know, the medication one is a good example, isn't it? And in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're unwell, if you may be struggling with other issues, with inflation, with worries about money at the moment, then this is not going to figure probably. So how we kind of get the story out to our patients that we're trying to do our best, and sometimes things might be different for them because of what we're doing and why it's important.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, we'll pick that up.
Okay, thank you both very much, and thank you, Megan, for all the hard work.
Thank you.
Right, moving us on, Finance and Performance Committee, upward report, Tim.
The report is as read. I just wanted to highlight that, continuing concern about CIP, but I think we were given a presentation, went through the new governance arrangements for monitoring CIP, and the fact that Glyn is now pushing for a further forward look on future options. And I think we'll have to monitor how that goes, but I suspect the challenge, there's still going to be a very significant in-year challenge as it stands, which I suspect will be very difficult to achieve. But I think we're setting the framework for future work in a better way going forward. PFI refinancing is as it said. I mean, it's not a new model to do. It's, it's been done on many PFIs. It's a substantial piece of work, and we will need external support to do it. I think the business case will come back to a future committee to sign off the permanent, the arrangement with external consultants. at that scale. And I think we'll have to look at the timescale as well, and the other work that Glyn's team is going to have to do at the same time, because that's not insubstantial. And we reviewed the EPR as we've done here, and we're very impressed by the rollout and success of that. So I wanted to congratulate the team, both in IM&T, but actually the much broader team, who are all the engagement for the operation community as well.
Do you want to just take us through the
finance? Yeah, sure. Yes. So where we are on finance, there are three big issues. The CIP is the first one. We're currently reporting only 500,000 of CIP delivered at the end of month 3. During July, I held reviews with each of the clinical divisions and some of the directorates, and that will jump markedly for month 4. So that is going to jump up to somewhere between 2 and 3 million delivered by the end of month 4. And we've also made it clear that people need to develop plans on how they are going to be delivered. We can't just have hand wringing to say it's difficult. Well, we know it's difficult, but we need a plan. What help do you need to get us to those points? So all divisions are going to be coming back with plans on how they get to their CIP targets. The important thing that Tim alluded to as well is that there's a group been established that is going to look at multi-year CIP as well. So the things that are difficult to deliver but will deliver bigger benefits, but we need to be working on them now to get a benefit this time next year. There is a group that is working on that, including divisional input into there, and there is a nice pot of bigger ideas that start to filter through there. The second problem we've got is we are still reliant on agency too much. Our agency spend is too high, and we're re-establishing an agency work group to start to get on top of what are the issues that are driving that and to get that back under control. The third item is around some uncertainty about the elective services recovery funding. So this is where, just to remind everyone, this is where we're getting additional income to deliver activity above the 1920 levels of activity. NBT, there are some issues around the baseline for that, and so some difficulties in calculating exactly what the level is that we're moving from. But based on our understanding of that, NBT is achieving the levels that we need to earn that elective recovery funding. There are some doubts about how that is being delivered at a system level. So as a system level, we're not delivering that, and the hard reading of the rules around earning ESRF are that as it is earned at a system level, not at a provider level. So we're working through that. We have heard some verbal assurance that in the first half of the year, because COVID has been a much higher level than it was in the planning assumptions, that ESRF penalties will be waived in the first half of the year. We haven't yet received that in writing. Hence, we have a £1 million provision in there for the loss of ESRF at present. As soon as we get that clarity, then we can obviously remove that provision. Other points to highlight is that we are behind on our capital plan at the moment. That's because we've been having to potentially reprioritise things based on some of the discussions we're having in the private board later this afternoon, which has meant we've not been able to press on with some other programmes, but we will have a plan subject to approvals. We'll have a plan to deliver our full capital plan by the end of the year. Happy to take any questions.
Questions for Glenn? No?
Just to the end of the paper, if we can just go back to the refinance section, there's a decision the board just needs to record around the change in interest rates before we move on.
So I can fill in a little bit of detail on that. You may remember some in the news that LIBOR, the London Interbank ordinary rate, was being manipulated, and so there's been a move away from a forward-looking prospective setting of a rate to looking at what was the rate that was used last night in London. So it's quite a technical thing that but because we're technically under the PFI, it is a refinancing because we're changing one of the terms that we use within it. I just wanted to get board approval that we're changing from one administrative rate to another one.
Don't have much choice, do we?
LIBOR's gone. No choice.
Actually, one thing I just thought of, the energy costs, which we've already factored some degree of risk into, I think the 8 to 15 million or something of that sort at one stage. Over the last 3 weeks, that number seems to have, the potential cost increase has grown more, another horrible percentage. And I'm just wondering whether or not we've refactored that risk factor, and whether or not we have any sort of assurance that we're going to get underwritten by the system for any further cost increases which are likely to transpire.
Yes, so if you remember, we flagged a £7 million increase in our electricity costs. That has been funded. I think that we have fixed that rate for the year. I'll take an action to come back on that.
Okay. All right, so we note the report. Are we happy to approve the transition to the PFI? Well, we don't have any choices, Maria quite rightly says, so. Okay. All right, let's move on. Quality Committee, John and Tim,
yeah.
I guess.
I'll take the paper as read, noting that you're invited to note the 2 key appendices, one on the Learning from Deaths annual report, and the other on the CQC letter. I'd just, rather than go through it piecemeal, I'll just highlight some bits which are particularly germane to what we've discussed today. CQC was a non-binding, but nevertheless advisory visit to surgery, and there is a pleasing recognition of an emphasis on patient experience, a reference to what was referred to earlier in Quality Committee have looked at in the past, which is the quality of experience on waiting lists, referring to the waiting well, and I think that it does behove us to keep a very, very keen sort of gimlet eye, probably through QC, on the waiting lists. In the past, of course, we've done some work and reported to this group on not only physical but psychological harm with expanded waiting lists. But there are some very positive remarks about the leadership and the imagination and agility of our recovery programme. We took a series of very interesting papers with a very intense discussion related to, firstly, the shared decision making over consent. I'm going to come back to that right at the end. Some really interesting stuff on the medical examiner service. This trust has been, and folk like Tim have been very key in, I'm sorry, and Christopher Brooks-Dorr, key in liaising with this new examiner service in its instigation and during its setup phase, which I think has benefited both the medical examiner and the trust. I've already referred to the Learning from Deaths annual report, and we had a very good discussion about incident reporting and the move to the new radar system, which I think we were all clear would assist in comparison to the existing Datex one, although as we always do, we circled the fact that we still will always have the unknown unknown. We can refine systems, but systems rely on reports coming into systems. And Michelle, you and I have talked about the hand grenade that we didn't know about rolling around on the floor in the past. And we just, again, it's something that we have to keep a constant eye on. So just coming back to the shared decision making and consent, this was a fantastic piece of work. It is clearly right at the cutting edge nationally. And we feel very strongly as a committee that we would like the board to invite a presentation on it at some stage, because I think it would be highly informative for the board. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much. I personally would endorse the board having a view of the consent process and the improvements to that. And as part of that, hearing from patients, you know, that we've consented well and not consented well. I think that would be telling. So can we kind of put that on the work plan, please?
October might look like
that's fine. That's fine. Okay. Questions for John. Tim, do you want to pull anything out of the Learning from Deaths report? at this stage? Or
No, it's there, there, and there was a nice summary paper as well. I think probably people will be looking at that and turning to a table which shows that we're compliant to some areas and needing to improve in others. So we're very aware of what that is. That's usually that largely is turnaround time for investigation and judgment reviews, which we are on. And secondly, and disappointingly, we have missed targets for a number of structured judgment reviews where patients have also endured learning difficulties and autism. In this trust particularly, we're really keen that we're an exemplar in that. I have to point out that that table, you got to remember, we are ahead of the game. We are a pioneer trust in this type of reporting. So that's not sort of benchmarked nationally. Those are markers in the sand, targets for us to strive towards. But I don't want you to think this is not a secret where there is room for improvement. We are setting the targets as we proceed.
And I'm assuming you are, with your team, doing a closer look at why some of those are not hitting our expectation rather than hitting a target, hitting our expectation as an organisation. Yeah. Okay. So will you then come back to the board at some point and flesh that out for us?
Absolutely, I can be happy to do that. And we are, I think what's important is a bit about the new EPR. We're transitioning to a new quality electronic system called Radar. John alluded to that. I guess we approach that with a little bit of, expectation and concern at this stage. I really hope that improves our reporting. So I'd prefer, Chair, if I can, to see that through in implementation through and then bring the data back, which will be towards the end of the year.
Okay. And then, sorry, just a minute. And then just to note that the CQC letter is largely, well, almost entirely positive, with some minor things that they have mentioned. They don't explain what they are. Is there anything in there that you want to draw our attention to, or these things that are within normal operational?
They were normal operational issues.
Okay, thank you.
It was just to say I attended as an observer at that meeting, and I'd been on quality committees in the past, and I actually felt inspired by it.
Wow.
Because it was doing some of the things that I had been suggesting or recommending or thinking about experimentally. And there was a sense that, certainly from the things presented, that people, our staff, were looking at problems and trying to solve them, which I think is very good. Yes, I found that.
That's great feedback, John. You're chairing a very good meeting, apparently.
It was my swan song, but that's very kind of you, Ike. But it's the staff. Look, it's it's a challenging committee to chair intellectually because of the range of subjects. But I reflect on. I think culturally our staff are interested in finding solutions, and Ike's put his finger on something which has made chairing that committee a real privilege.
Thank you. That's really good feedback. Right, let's move on. Patient and Carer Committee, upward report. Kelvin.
Yep, report set out. Basically, just to sort of emphasise a couple of things. We had a really powerful patient story in that we had a group of patients with autism did an audit in our ED department as set out, and gives a clean bill of health in some areas, but also with some really pointed suggestions around how to improve the sort of pathway for those types of patients, and we're carrying on with that process. I think it'd be really helpful, I think, when we get to the end of that process, that we kind of have the board, they come back and report to the board, I think, because it's so powerful. Sandra might want to say a couple of words around that. Second thing to highlight is we obviously have the annual report, the complaints report as well, which is set out in detail on the upward report. And I think, and yeah, I'm just trying to move my screen. Yeah, and pleased to know that we've got the patient involvement work that we're doing is we're trying to get a bigger and wider range of voices in that, and we've been successful in getting a more diverse range of patients involved in our services across the board. And I think we'll provide you with a bit more of a detailed update related to that a bit further. So that was kind of what I wanted to cover off. Sandra, do you want to say a couple of words around the patient story?
Yeah, if I just say it was incredibly powerful, I've got to say, and they were so impressed by the feedback we gave them that one of them burst into tears because she said it's the first time she's felt that she's really been listened to and acknowledged when she's been asked to do something. So I think all credit to everyone at NBT who'd been involved in the process and the fact that she brought it to a committee. So I completely endorse what Kelvin was saying. I think it'd be a very good idea if they go through the process and then they bring it back to the board and talk to us. They had gone to great length themselves to manage their various conditions so that they could present to us, and they got through it, as I say, and it was inspirational to listen to. It really was.
That's wonderful. Well, that sounds like a patient story to me.
Yes, yeah. We'll stop on that. Can I just make one more reference to the emergency department mental health planned assessment project? I think we've seen some significant improvements in the provision of our care within the emergency department for people who have suffering with mental health episodes, and that we've basically had a pilot project with a clinic working on 3 days a week that we're extending to 5 days a week. Where we've actually seen significant reductions in the time it takes for those patients to be dealt with when we refer them to that clinic. So I think that there's a model of care there that we've put our finger on that we need to extend out and move to a sort of core 24-hour service. And I know we're talking to commissioners around that, but that I think that goes some way to deal with the cohort of mental health patients we're seeing through ED, to try and reduce the impact that they're having in that department, but dealing with them more appropriately. So that was quite a powerful report we had as well.
Certainly reading the paper, it was obviously a really rich meeting.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, I think, and also very powerful for for us having that separate committee, actually, because there's been during the process, I mean, it was Rob's idea, wasn't it, back some time ago, Michelle, and I think it's now really maturing into quite a rich committee in terms of us now actually implementing some feedback that we're getting from patients and carers. So
great, thank you. Are there any questions for Kelvin? No? Okay, so quickly round the room for any other business. So John, Sandra, Kelvin?
Nothing from me.
Sarah, Tim,
Thanks.
Kelly, Jackie, Richard? No, okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the public?
None submitted ahead of the meeting, no.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So the date of the next public meeting, 29th of September, and I think that's also the day of our AGM.
AGM, correct.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So it's 15:15. I suggest we resume at what?
17 minutes before private board.
I suggest we resume at 2:45 for private board, half-hour lunch break. Yeah. Thank you.